Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting in order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. We'll take a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
I'd like to make two changes to the
Ted.
agenda. The first is to add a new motion to address the reserve study. Do you want to do these one at a time, or you want me to give both of them?
Let's do one at a time.
Okay, that would be a new motion to address the reserve study.
Any questions? Okay, Ted, what's your second one?
The second one is to, under unfinished business, remove the word motion in front of all four of those things, because under the new BO1, you can have a second reading without having to have a motion. So we would remove the word motion in front of that, and we would move a motion for adoption of each of those resolutions under new business, and that just kind of straightens it out a little bit.
And that's procedural more than anything else. Okay, very good.
Yes.
Understood? Yes. All right, I'll entertain a motion to accept the meeting agenda as amended.
I'd like to add another
Slobodan.
amendment to the agenda. I would like to add a topic, cash and investments, to the agenda for discussion purposes.
Discussion.
Right.
Okay. All right. Any other additions to or changes to the meeting agenda? All
I'd
right.
move to accept.
All right. Is there a second? All right. All those in favor of accepting the amended meeting agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right. Move to approval of previous meeting minutes, the minutes from November 30th. I'll entertain a motion to accept the meeting minutes as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Comments? All right, close the question and call for a vote. All those accepting the minutes of the November meeting as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Moving to the minutes of the January meeting, I'll accept a motion to accept the minutes of that meeting as presented.
So moved.
January 12th.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions? I'll close the issue, accept a acceptance of the meeting minutes of the January 12th meeting. All those in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
One abstained. I did not attend the meeting, so I'm abstaining.
Okay. Colette, could you please note that on the on the minutes? Thank you. Okay, President's remarks. Couple of things. One is it was brought to my attention that we've had a passing of some folks in the Ocean Pines area that I think should be recognized for their contributions over the years. I didn't know these people personally, but felt when I heard about what they've contributed to Ocean Pines, it was well worth mentioning their passing and thanking them for them. James Mills passed recently, and I don't know if you noticed, but he and his wife pretty much attended every board meeting. I thought it was interesting. You know, I just did not know them, but I recognized them all the time, so they were very interested in the goings-ons of Ocean Pines. And I'm also told, and correct me if I'm wrong, he was also responsible for raising the flag at the North Gate. So again, just an individual whose time and effort towards Ocean Pines, you know, wanted to be recognized, and I just wanted to recognize him as well. Another individual who recently passed, Andrew Sorrell. He was active in the community, but one of the things that stands out is all of the aerial photos that are in the hallway of the admin building. Mr. Sorrell contributed those, and through his efforts, it just made the place look a bit better, and I wanted to make sure that people realize that as well. And the third individual, many people, and although I never met him personally, Dan Starchersky, who had passed recently, he was on the board of directors for quite some time, served as the board president, or I'm sorry, the president of the association for some period, and I also wanted to recognize him and the effort. So those three individuals And you know, we just wanted to make sure that it's recognized that their contributions to Ocean Pines were certainly well received, okay? And the second issue I wanted to talk about, there's been a lot of information going back and forth regarding a fitness center, all right? So there's been a lot of opinions that have been shared, and I think it's the board's responsibility, matter of fact, it's the board's responsibility to take all of this information and make sure that we do the due diligence to understand that that's an ask from the community. It's something that we have to consider, it's something that we have to vet, and it's not something that we're just going to dismiss as white noise. I think it's important to listen to that. That's the board's responsibility, so I appreciate getting all of that information. What I can say is it won't be in conjunction with things that are going on right now on the second floor. But what I can commit to, and I hope the board will certainly follow along and commit to the fact that it's certainly something that we need to look into, and you know, I can certainly commit to push it forward to get the information, to look at a business case, to understand what it would take to have a fitness center somewhere in Ocean Pines if that's what the community wants, all right? I suspect there'll be a number of people that will make public comments today on that. I just ask that in the interest of time, if we're just going to continue to repeat ourselves, I just ask you to take that into consideration for not only the people that are attending here, but the people also watching and looking at it online, all right? So that's it for President's comments. Let's move on to the Treasurer's report. Pat. There's our high tech when you need it.
So I'll just read the report, which of course always makes it a little
All right,
more.
and for those listening in online, we apologize. We don't have a projector and a way to display the reports. So if you can listen in, I apologize ahead of time. Thank you.
For operating results year to date, we are $1,881,000 on the bottom line, and that is a $921,000 negative variance from budget. That negative variance is projected to be over $1.2 million at fiscal year end. For food and beverage payroll costs, the standard is 35%, and the yacht 35% of sales, and for the yacht club, the measure was 56%. For the beach club, 45%. That's a new metric that I think we started tracking this year and will be valuable going forward. Cash available for operations, $947,000, and the reserve balance is $8,155,000. So our total cash position at year end is $9,102,000. Of that amount, the cash available for operations, which is not on my sheet, the cash available for operations is $947,000. Replacement capital, year-to-date, $689,000. New capital, year-to-date, $215,000. So our total capital spend year-to-date, $904,000. A new metric that the Director of Finance has added, FTEs, which is full-time equivalents, relates to our payroll hours. Actual year-to-date, 80. Budgeted year-to-date, 86. That's full-time. Part-time, actual year-to-date, 33. Budgeted year-to-date, 78. And for our cash position, we have our cash in an insured sweep account with Bank of Ocean City, fully insured sweep account with Bank of Ocean City. The funds are deposited in multiple banks, which and no balance exceeds $250,000. We have been moving investments to CDARS, laddered CDARS, 3, 6, 9, 12 months with the Bank of Ocean City. The Finance Committee has recommended a second bank, and we are currently looking into Union Bank, which is a national bank, and possibly another bank or two to move forward with more CD investments. And $1 million will be moved in the next week to a second bank. That's my report.
Colleagues, any questions for Pat? Pat, thank you. Move on to the General Manager's report. JB.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'll start briefly just to say that regarding the budget, you'll see a budget presentation shortly in the rest of the meeting. We'll also have a PowerPoint presentation on the bulkhead management program. All I'll say right now for the budget is the fact that we have the formal presentation today to the board, followed by 3 days of work sessions by the board of directors on February 5, 6, and 7, followed by another opportunity for a member comment and hearing date on February 10th. And then on February 24th, the board will meet to make any amendments to the budget at that point in time and adopt a final budget. You'll hear those dates again as we get into that budget presentation itself. The bulkhead program, you'll hear about that shortly. I want to speak a moment about food and beverage. I just want to summarize this report that I have provided to the board. You know, we can go into the past all we want to, but that doesn't change what we're going to do going forward. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. But we have 7 different locations where we serve or could serve something to eat. The ones that everybody knows is Yacht Club and Beach Club and Turn Grill. We also have served food in the past at the Swim and Racket Club, Mumford's Landing Pool, at the Community Center, and other pools. Each location, though, based on its respective scope of service, should be handled differently. I'm recommending that we continue to operate and manage in-house. However, for the largest 2 operating areas, that being the Beach Club and Yacht Club, we'll be recommending a different approach. The food and beverage at Swim and Racket Club and at Mumford's Landing Pool will be handled by the aquatics director going forward. Those operation factors have been included in the 2019 budget. Other options for snacks at the pools are simple snack offerings, not prepared foods, and they are handled by the on-site staff. The same can be said of the snack offerings at the community center, and those will be under the direction and oversight of the Director of Recreation and Parks. Turn Grill is recommended to return, at least for this year, to the operational direction of the Director of Golf, and the recommended budget also reflects this. Turn Grill is a separate operation from the proposed changes to the second floor of the country club, the building that we're in. Again, at least for this coming fiscal year. As we finish the renovations of the second floor, our operational approach will necessarily change and become dependent on the usage booked for the new space. Regardless, there will have to be good communication between the Director of Golf and the other departments, including administration, parks and recreation, and food and beverage banquet planning for large-scale golf tournaments, association meetings, clubs, and organizational use, as well as banquets or receptions. Focusing on this year, the Director of Golf will be in charge of operating the Turn Grill. This will allow us to correct the deficiencies of last year of not having an on-course beverage cart and other food services available when we needed it. Lack of service this past season may impact our revenue stream in this coming season, particularly with our package play, and those concerns were reflected in my original proposed budget in the conservative revenue budget figures for the golf operations. Having the Director of Golf hardwired into the Turn operation, though, will make a huge difference in our ability to provide a quality visit to our guests, thus hopefully impacting our revenue numbers at the golf course. As for the big 2, we have 3 options for the Yacht Club and the Beach Club. 1, we could keep the operation strictly in-house. This would require the general manager to seek a qualified candidate to hire as food and beverage director. Then that individual would have to fire a full complement of staff, train them, keep training them, create the menus, and manage the customer service and financial business applications. The problem with this approach is that the association would still have the headaches of oversight and management, and time is short. Secondly, we could pursue direct outsourcing. What this means in this definition is a direct lease of our facilities to a third party. That entity gets everything, all the expense, all the headaches, all the responsibility. In my opinion, the problem with this concept is our timing. The opportunity to pursue this approach expired last September-October time period. The need to develop a request for proposals, get it approved by the board, put it out in the marketplace, review the responses, receive presentations from those proposers, and receive feedback from the membership, make a decision and implement it. That process takes time to be done right and needed to be done early last fall. Thirdly, we can pursue a managing partner arrangement with a third-party consultant. This option provides us with immediate expertise to manage our 2 main food and beverage operation entities. We have proposals from those who have proven themselves successful in this marketplace around Ocean City. And in this format, the group will receive a management fee and a percentage of the reduction in the subsidy level and/or increase in the net profit of the two F&B facilities. The first year of such a contract would be based upon the approved 2018-19 budget. We wouldn't go back and change it at this point to reflect that, because that impacts the negotiating numbers, but we could do that, I guess. If successful, the contract renewal would be renegotiated after Labor Day. The contractor would also serve as a consultant in the development of the following year's budget. And this would likely necessitate a change in the contract terms for the second and following years. It is this third option that is the recommended approach that we pursue. We have 3 proposals to review. We'll do that in closed session a little bit later today. And I've also received advice from a 4th consultant agreeing with the notion that we should probably close for a while and start over. That is basically what we are indeed doing. Because of the need to maintain the association's negotiating strength in contract decisions, the details of the proposals will be shared initially in executive session with the Board of Directors later today. Once negotiations have been finalized, the details of any contractual arrangement will be made public. The plan is for the general manager to share those proposal details with the board today, January 27th. The GM will make a recommendation during the executive session period. As anticipated, the board will decide on that recommendation at that time, at least to the point of directing that a contract be drafted for final approval at a special meeting of the board, probably in conjunction with the board's budget work sessions, February 5 through 7. The intent would be for the contract to start on approval, and then a managing partner would commence work immediately. So that's my report on food and beverage. Again, the Board of Directors will be taking those proposals up later on today. With regard to the country club efforts of this building, the engineers will be here on Tuesday. I think President Parks has already addressed some of the stream of emails that we got this past week. And that's all good input. We are working to coordinate the drawings for the construction documents. And once those are completed and have board approval, then we'll put those out into the marketplace for bid so that construction can begin as quickly as possible, and we can see how much we can get done upstairs by this summer. Regarding the management software issues, we have 5 proposals that we've received. The technology work group will be reviewing those, and will determine if we have any additional demonstration projects for people to come in and sort of give that dog and pony show, if you would, of their particular software. And then that group will be forwarding a recommendation on to the Board of Directors for next steps. Drainage, I'm looking to have a meeting in February of the former group that had been working on a couple of years ago to develop a preliminary plan for preliminary review by the board by the May board meeting, if not earlier. There are sort of 4 or 5 legs to that stool, if you would. The things that we have to do, right now everything's reactive. It rains, we go out and we fix it. We blow lines out, we blow ditches out, and try to keep things clean as we go. But it's totally reactive. There's no large-scale plan. All the engineering's been done. We don't have to spend more money on engineering studies and hydrographic surveys or anything like that. We just need to finalize a plan and educate the membership on how that plan works. The pieces of that, the legs to that chair, if you would, or table, whatever analogy we want to use, is the things that we have to do immediately when we have a problem, a lot of rain at one time, the things that are exacerbated during rainfall that are a bigger problem and aren't just blowing a pipe out. I was over around, I think it was Martinique this past week, and when it rains over there 2 or 3 inches, it's not just something that clogs up the ditch line, it becomes lakefront property at that point for a week or more. And that's not going to be something that we can fix in and of ourselves and easily or cheaply. It's going to probably require some county effort and maybe some other heavy lifting by other parties. So those are two things. Third is a preventive maintenance plan where we deal with all the ditch lines in the association. Now, I recognize somebody called me a bureaucrat the other day for throwing out some numbers, but I want to throw them out again. So everybody, and the purpose of that was to let everybody know that we got a lot of ditches to figure out. We have 82 miles of road. That's 164 miles of ditch line that's just alongside our roads. Now, how many of you have a ditch line next to your house or behind it? Okay, add that, and we're well over 200 miles of ditch lines. Well, if we're going to use, say we had a four-man crew that was designated only to that, and they worked 24 hours a day for 365 days, they'd have to do a half a mile a day in order to get to all those ditch lines. That's not possible, obviously. So how do we figure out a plan to begin to preventive maintenance all of that so that we don't have more problems that become just a reactionary issue to solve? And the fourth piece is education and the role of the members yourselves in dealing with those drainage issues. Obviously, with that much ditch line, we're going to need help. We can do a lot of the heavy lifting, but there's a role for everybody to play in taking care of your own property as well. So, lastly, two last things. Reserve study, we're finishing up the scrubbing of our 2,000 plus items that are on that reserve study. We should be able to have a meeting in late February or early March. This is for the board's consideration in the Budget and Finance Committee. I've sort of mentioned this ad nauseum, that there are three big questions that the community needs to answer with regard to reserves, particularly replacement capital reserves. What's the minimum balance that we want to maintain in our reserves? What is the percentage of funding of our replacement items that we want to fund at? And third, what's our inflation factor that we want to incorporate into that? The way the DMA reserve study works is that we will be able to, the board and the Budget and Finance Committee members will be able to go in and as well as everybody else watching, to say, all right, say we want a $1 million balance and we want to fund it at 50% and we want to use an inflation factor of 1.7% for the last 3 years. And those numbers get plugged into their database, and you can see those numbers, that line move as to what that does to our funding capabilities going out 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. So those are the three big questions. Until we finish scrubbing it, then we can have that meeting, and then we can, as a community, we can really get our heads wrapped around what our reserves mean and where we need to be. And those are the three big questions that we still haven't answered as a community. Last piece of news I'll share with everybody we always go out on a good note, my dad told me. So we have received confirmation that the Peninsula Regional Medical Center has committed to a $12,000 sponsorship for our 50th anniversary. Thank you, sir.
JB, thank you.
All right. From that, Mr. President, you want me to go on into
Please do.
bulkheads? I guess we want to back up all right, so, yeah, it's after that. I'm going to go through this. This is the budget piece, which is coming next. So we'll get over here to our, okay, I will slow down. All right. There we go. I have with us this morning Kevin Layfield, our Director of Operations and our Facilities Manager, excuse me. And he's going to help me go through this I'll sort of take the lead, I guess. You want me to do that, or you want to run with it?
However you want to handle it.
All right.
We can go page by page. When you started,
This is our IT piece. We'll get back in place. Thank you, Kevin.
My name's Kevin Layfield, by the way. Nice to meet everybody.
Close?
Currently with the bulkhead replace and repair program, what we do is we break it down into two different categories, whether the bulkhead itself is in such distress that it's going to need to be replaced, or if we're able to slip by with some temporary repairs until we can line it up on, which you'll see later in the presentation, with additional runs of bulkheads to replace at one time, which results in a much better, stronger product. When we're looking at repairs currently, what Ocean Pines Public Works does is we look at the minor settling of the soils in the back. Could be potential for a hole or just some settling from when the bulkhead was done and the backfill wasn't properly tamped down, things like that. So if it's something simple, we'll send one of our guys over and they'll take some dirt over and some seed and straw and put it down and fill in the holes. Sometimes there's cap boards that are missing from the storms, abnormal high tides, that'll blow some of the older cap boards off once the nails and everything have become rusted and a little loose and the holes open up. We'll take care of that. We'll also do some patching on some holes. If we can dig down and actually see the hole, it's above the water line, we'll come in and we'll do some patching with some plywood or some sheathing boards to hold on to the problem until we can justify its replacement versus an actual repair. And then broken tie rods. With the broken tie rods, what we'll do is just dig back a little bit, dig down, pull the wall back, and weld the tie rod together and replace it to try to get by once again until the problems become justifiable to do an actual replacement. We'll slide ahead of these. For replacement, we're looking at now, once the bulkhead has reached its actual life cycle, which is about 30 years, where does it fall in line with bulkheads that are adjacent to it that have been repaired, replaced? Is it time to take that section and replace it, or can we stretch it just a little bit longer? The bulkheads that are beyond the scope of repair due to the rot, the worm infestations, multiple broken tie rods, sometimes we have faulty product that it was built with that eventually rots prematurely. That can turn into a situation where we need to replace the bulkhead. And once again, that's a larger section than just a simple little hole to fix. And the bulkhead is determined necessary for replacement due to replacement of adjoining bulkheads. Another situation would be we have a bulkhead that's to be replaced in 5 years. The ones on each side of it are justifiable to be replaced immediately. We will go ahead and replace that one, because the problem we've been having that I've noticed over the years, and I formerly was the county inspector for the bulkheads here in Ocean Pines, is that when we take and do short sections and leave connections, that's where all our failures are occurring, and that's where we're having, so it's better and stronger on those bulkheads if we can do longer runs instead of 70 feet here, 70 feet here. We'd like to do, at least 5 to 6 lots at a time at the minimum. I got some pictures next, just some examples of some of the damage.
Problem is our Wi-Fi keeps dropping out.
I think we'll get ready to come up. Yeah. Can we go back one?
It was just the pictures.
These are the pictures. The two in the middle, that shows some worm damage. You can see the holes in the sheathing. And then on the left and the right, if you can see, are the tie rods. One is about broken through, and the other one is starting to break through. Your tie rods can break from the saltwater exposure. We also have problems where the tie rods break back into the yard because the fill dirt, first we have salt penetration in there too, but also the pH of the soils can cause the tie rods to prematurely break and corrode. Oh, we lost her again. I'm gonna grab my,
Yeah.
can I have a
You need one? You got a hard copy?
Yeah.
Okay. He just sleeps. He goes to sleep or something? Okay.
Currently, right now, with the 2017 budget, the replacement project we're working on, just to give you a little bit of history, an RFP was issued, and the bidding process was started back in February by DBF Engineering, and there was a company, High Tide, that was the lowest bidder. So at that point, the contract was to be awarded to them, but the award was never followed through with, and the contract was never followed through with it. That was back in February. Work was postponed because of that. The spring and summer boating season come up, so work was postponed till the fall. We received county approval and permits to replace 1,200 linear feet of bulkhead with vinyl in August. These permits expire in August of 2019. We received our state and federal approvals in August of 2007. I'm sorry, in the spring of 2017. Those approvals themselves expire in 2019 also. Work was to begin October 1st, but it was delayed to the contract dispute, and work commenced on December 1st of 2017. The contract was awarded to replace 24 West Mallard only, which is 154 linear feet of bulkheading, and the contract to complete the additional work of bulkheading, which I'll show you with some picture examples here in a minute, was contingent upon the satisfactory completion of the work that was being done at 24 West Mallard. The estimated cost based on the current contract of 1,200 linear feet to complete this is going to be $326,400, and that's based on $272 a linear foot. In that linear foot price, that also includes the stabilization work to do behind the bulkhead also to meet the sediment and erosion control standards. And that was something in the past that was not, that Ocean Pines Public Works did and kind of come behind the people and tied up our guys doing. But at this point, we would like to, we got bidding for a turnkey project, not just a, where we actually participated in some of it. Now, we'll come through and do touch-up and things like that, but we're trying to put most of the bulkhead project work relying upon the contractor that's doing the work. You can go to the next one. This is just a list of the properties that I currently have, Ocean Pines currently has permitting in full. That's your state, your federal, and your county permit, so that we can complete the work.
Just won't forget doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Just get it up on one of them. Okay. We're gonna revert to one screen.
Okay.
But anyway,
I was getting ready to continue into the picture just to show the areas that I have current permitting for.
going with the description of the 2016.
Okay, yep. Prior to 2017 and the hiring of DBF to start assessing some of the bulkheads, under the 30-year plan and the current way that Ocean Pines Public Works was assessing the bulkheads, we had a list of replacements to do in 2016. Multiple properties totaling approximately 3,400 linear feet were identified in the spring of 2016 for need of replacement repair and received permit approval from state and federal authorities. Before we can proceed with that, I still have to get the county approval, which isn't any trouble. It's just submitting the permit and everything. But the only thing we're running up against is we have additional work now where the permits also expire, the state and federals, which are a little more difficult to get. They expire in 2019. So the 2016 program will also require some additional engineering, and I'm just trying to talk about how much time it's going to take. We have to get somebody, and we have a lot of concrete bulkhead over on Westfield Circle, which isn't a repair or isn't a replacement because we're not going to rip the concrete out. It'll be more of a repair, but I have to get an engineering firm in to design that for us. The estimated cost of the bulkhead, 34 linear feet at $272 a square foot, is $918,000. It represents the current contract price that we're using over on Wood Duck. Now, all these numbers are as if the contractor will hold the price, which he's given us indications he's going to be able to. The project start date needs to start October 1st of 2018 so we can complete that in the spring of 2019. It's a little tough without the visuals. And I had a list on the next page, and I can make copies of this or get this put on the website so people can obtain it. And it's just a list of the additional properties to be done under the 2016 project. In addition to those two projects, we were currently under a 30-year plan where every 30 years the bulkhead was replaced, no matter what. So unless, and sometimes it did get skipped, I don't want to say no matter what. We would evaluate them by priority and replace them accordingly. Individual bulkheads may be repaired in lieu of replacement according to the life of the adjoining bulkheads. That's why we have some that were held off on. There are some people that have not had their bulkhead replaced due to the condition of the bulkheads adjoining to them, and once again getting back into trying to do multiple runs versus a short amount here and there. We do need to complete the 30-year plan by 2022, so we can put that behind us, and we know that all bulkheads, everybody that's paid into it over the years, all the bulkheads in Ocean Pines have been replaced at least once. At the same time, we want to incorporate the new assessment with the data tracking and the actual on-site visits, getting in the water, assessing the bulkheads ourselves to wrap that 30-year plan up. There's 81 properties left that have not been replaced, so we'll be chipping away at those at the same time. Okay, we've estimated some numbers for each year, and from now to April 30th, there are 7 properties that we can feasibly do that are part of that 2017 project. The cost estimate to complete that will be $204,272. Coming around for the next fiscal year, May 1st of 2018 to April 30th of 2019, I have permitting for 9 properties that need to be done, and that's the completion of the 2017 permitting. And the total cost estimated on that is $371,872. In addition to that, the reserve study indicates that there's 22 additional properties that are at the end of their life cycle and should be ready for repair. We have not assessed those, so this number here is not a firm number, but if we were to take a worst case scenario and all of them had to be repaired, on top of the 371,000 that I already have permitting for, there would be an additional 418,880,000 that would be needed to repair those bulkheads. Now, once again, that number is just an estimated number under a worst case scenario. I feel that when we go out, we'll find some areas that can be repaired versus replaced, or they may be able to be held off on until they are in need of repair once we assess them. Coming around.
Kevin, may I interject for a second? That comes to a total of $993,000 between now and next April 30th of 2019. Yes. Right?
Yes, total amount
and
that
that's what
potential.
we have in the budget.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the budget is. No, that comes to the 418 and the 71
Right.
comes to 800, a little over 800,000,
Right.
and that's what we have in the budget. Yes, yes, correct. Coming around to 2019, May 1st to April 30th of 2020. We're still working under trying to get the work done under the permitting that I already have in place before things begin to expire. If we can get the job started, the permit will not expire. So it'll be 17 properties off of the 2016 list at an estimated cost of $722,000. Then on the reserve study, we have another additional 19 properties, which would bring us to $358,700 potentially. Once again, those properties need to be assessed, reviewed, and seen how much repair or if they do need replacement. But that would bring us a little over $1 million in the April 3rd or the 19 to 20 budget year. Moving forward from that, going from 20 to 21, right now that would complete our properties that I have permitting for. So just strictly looking at a life cycle change from the capital reserve study. The capital reserve study indicates that there's a potential of 124 properties to be replaced at that time. So worst case on that one would be $2.6 million to replace. But that's, once again, we haven't gone through and assessed the bulkheads, seen what's needed, and determined how we're going to pick which ones are going to be repaired and in need of repair and keep moving forward on the replacements. Following year, same situation, 101 properties when we're looking at 21 to 22. at a total cost of $2.1 million to repair or replace. So, and again, that's a worst-case scenario. Those numbers should be substantially lower. What's up on the board now, that represents the properties from the 2017 project that I have permitting on to begin, that's fully permitted. So it's basically shovel-ready. What we are currently doing in the lower left-hand corner, that is 24 Mallard Drive West. What I'm talking about doing from now till the spring is all the way down to into the upper left-hand corner, that section of bulkheading there, and being able to get that completed before the boating season of this year starts.
Kevin, just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
When you did the summary on anticipated future property repairs and potential financial impact for 2020, 2021, this does not factor in any potential catastrophic failures.
Yes, we always have to keep that in the back of our mind too, that we may have a situation come up where a hurricane comes through and damages a
Right.
large section of bulkhead, and it needs to be repaired under a catastrophic failure too, yes.
So as the crew continues with the evaluation going forward, this is going to be factored in, and it's going to become more clear to the board in terms of the projected
Yes.
bulkhead reserve needs.
Yeah, what we have to do is we got to get on the ground and start assessing them ourselves, yes.
Thanks.
I'll just, if you want to go back to that one, I'll talk about what that one there was. This is these properties here are under the 2016 permitting that I have the federal and state permits for, and not the county permits. And there are areas over in Westfield Circle, which includes quite a bit of concrete. We got a few over off of Clubhouse, Teal Circle, Mallard Drive East, which is, right now we have an engineering firm looking at that one. We're having some failure there prematurely. So those are what were planned to be permitted in 2016 that got bumped once the engineering firm was brought in, and they started doing their study. So I want to go to moving forward. In moving forward, we need to get out and identify the priority areas using the capital reserves system to identify the sections that are due to be replaced by their life cycle. In addition, that'll help us complete the 30-year plan. Once the 30-year plan is complete, they're now giving an estimated life cycle on the bulkheads of 35 years. So, yeah, their life cycle, everything will just be bumped up, but we'll still continue to assess. That's just a way for us to gauge how old the bulkhead is and when it might be in need of definite repair or replacement. We'll do an annual bulkhead inspection that is in the boat and in the water, inspecting the whole line of bulkhead, not only from land but also from the water. And that'll help us project any areas of future concern. Even if, with your question with the catastrophic failure, if we see areas along the bayfront that are getting close to being in need, they might be prioritized a little bit, because that's what's going to take the blunt of any of the storms that we're going to get. That'll take the brunt of everything. So we'll analyze the work orders as they come in, and that's for the filling of holes. That might help us identify some areas where there's some broken tie rods or some holes where the worms have ate through and things like that, to keep an eye on those trends. All that work will help us estimate some more accurate costs for budgeting. We don't want to have a system where we just push a button and a computer tells us how many places we're going to have to replace and just spend that money when we might not have to. We'll permit according to budget. I'll have an idea of how much money we're going to spend, and then we'll permit the linear footage till that's completed. We have to prepare engineer drawings for those permits. We then submit to Department of Environment and the Army Corps of Engineers for our initial permitting. Once those permits come back, I submit to the county for approval, and we're issued a shoreline permit, and that allows us to start the work.
Hey, Kevin, can I ask a question? Does the analysis also include dredging of the canals, or any consideration for that in this, or is that a separate
Dredging
effort?
is separate, yes.
Dredging is separate, okay. And will we look at what it's going to take to meet the requirements to continue to keep the canals.
Yeah,
in the condition
our
that they're
plans
in.
this spring is to go out in the boat and actually physically do some soundings ourselves before, and to determine at that point, do we need to call in an engineering firm to begin the permitting, and to get that process started and to get some numbers on
Thank you.
that. And then we'll bid the projects. Due to the changing dynamics on each project, historically, Ocean Pines would have a 3-year contract with, or a long-term contract with a vendor in order to control costs and things like that. Each project is different, especially with the vinyl, being how we're switching to vinyl out on the points of the river and everything. They have to be engineered. So now we're going to start bidding each project individually, because everything changes on it, from materials to the time it's going to take to its location. So we probably can get some better pricing if we don't try to do everything as a blanket. Oh, I'm sorry, Ted.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. One, you're talking about using vinyl on the points where we're really up against the rivers, or
Yes.
that kind of stuff, and continuing to use wood, since the use of the vinyl kind of steals space. And so if we continue to use that inside, the canals will be squeezing the
Yeah,
canals.
we're looking at the vinyl where we're having the worm damage, which is on the points out towards the river and on the bay, because the worms like to bore into wood when the water's fast moving and clear. So all our environmental efforts over the years has cleared up the water, but now the worms are moving back in that historically haven't been present.
And the second question is, are we tracking independently the cost of public works to do repair and replacement of these bulkheads that should potentially be coming out of reserve funds rather than coming out of an operating budget?
Yes, we have. Well, I've been tracking them myself,
Okay.
yeah, on what we're spending on the
Just
repairs.
because if it's reserve replacement that we're doing in-house, that's how that ought to be funded rather than out of the normal operating budget. And the third thing is, reasonably, it sounds like, not even going to worst case, we're looking at about $1 million a year for the next 2 years in
Yes.
average needed and required expenditures.
Yeah, that's average needed. That's also getting done. What's been waiting to be done. The bulkheads, the rot, the corrosion, and all that doesn't stop when we don't do the work. So if I don't get a lot done one year, it just piles on to the next year. So once we get caught up, I think we'll see everything level out, and everything will be a lot more accurate, and I think the numbers will go down considerably.
Thank you.
Karen, may I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
In the engineering studies that have been done up to this point, is there consideration for the impact of rising sea levels on the sufficiency of our existing bulkheads?
The issue with the rising sea levels, excuse me, the issue with the rising sea levels, and addressing those with the bulkheads, are what we open up when we approach that is stormwater management, and that could lead into a tremendous amount of expense. We're operating in the buffer, and in the end product, what we don't want to do is trap water within the properties. So if we raise the bulkhead on a property, first, if we bring in more fill than 100 cubic yards, or we disturb more than 5,000 square feet, we end up kicking automatically into a stormwater management issue. But additionally, that's the critical area buffer. And what happens there, you have to get a variance from the critical area board from Annapolis in order to do that disturbance. So I think the idea of raising the bulkheads to prevent the tides coming in the end, does not create the safety that I think people are assuming that it would. It can actually create additional problems, causing water in your crawl space and things like that. So we couldn't have an area where we could raise the bulkhead on one lot, drop the bulkhead. We couldn't do it on the next lot because of the base elevation of the house or the crawl space or things like that. So the way to handle the sea level rise at this point is not through raising the bulkheads. It will just create too much of there's too much work to be done. You could potentially have to raise houses, things like that, just to accommodate for the stormwater. Yes, sir. Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. Did that address that? Moving to our long-term strategy. What I've been discussing with doing the small sections, we want to eliminate the piecemeal longer sections, we'll repair longer sections to prolong the life of the adjoining sections till they're ready. Repairing longer sections is more efficient and creates a stronger structure. We get into a bidding process that could all come into play and into saving some money through the contractors that way. We'll review and assess forecasted work utilizing capital reserve, work orders, and a yearly physical evaluation. We need to bring the bulkhead program up to date that by bidding each project separately. And also what's important here at the bottom is using multiple contractors to complete the multiple projects. Right now, one contractor could not bring us up to date. We need to have a couple companies come in, and that's not having them work side by side, but in separate areas of the Pines in order to get this program back on its feet again. And then once the program is up to date, I feel that we could then, at that point, look at using a doing a long-term contract, because we would be more into each year after we assess it, we would then know what's going to need to be repaired and what is going to need to be replaced. And I think moving along forward, we're going to find that the replacements are probably going to taper back quite a bit, and we're going to move into more repair. We're looking to streamline the program, once again, through replacing the longer sections, using all the information, the new technologies, and just through forecasting. So we'll know what we're doing ahead of time, which we always have. We're just going to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at everything. Now, this is I just want to give an example of what our new strategy would be. What you see up there again is the picture of the areas that we have permitting for now at this point. And in normal circumstances, we would just move forward and then look at the 2016, which is in other areas. But at this point, what I'd like to do is, get to the next one, please. Looking at the areas in orange, these are areas that I've already been out and we've identified as problems. There's multiple broken tie rods at the end of Mallard Drive West. There's issues with worms and broken tie rods at the end of Mallard Drive East. So what I would like to do is, while we have a contractor in the area, is to go ahead and permit those properties that are, work on the engineering and the permitting for the properties that are in yellow moving forward, so that we can complete that complete run and have that done, and that'll go into the 35-year life cycle or capital reserve study, and then we shouldn't have to worry about that for a good amount of time. Plus, we don't have 3 different points out there where the wave action, the storms hitting it, can cause structural problems with the bulkhead. We're looking at one solid unit protecting the fronts of the that's all bayfront, so protecting those properties. And then we would just continue to monitor the remaining lots. Let me get one more. Oh, should have one in there that has red. There we go. And the red shows the remaining lots to be done. Now, some of them have a 9 to 10 years on the capital reserve before they're supposed to be replaced. I have a few in there that have never been replaced, and then I have a few that are 3 or 4 years of being away from replacement. So what we would do in this situation is monitor those properties and wait until we had a justifiable enough reason that we would do all the properties versus just doing one in the middle or one piecemealing them here or there. And we'll monitor them, and something needs repaired or a simple repair or something like that. We'll continue to do that until the situation justifies completing the entire areas in red. Then we only have really 4 connection points in there that we have to worry about in the future of potential leak problems.
With that,
Yep.
that last slide is regarding next step, and that's to get this work continued on through the end of this fiscal year, through April 30th. We'd like to continue and finalize things to do that work with high tide, so we don't have to go back out for an RFP and delay that process any further. So while there's no action required by the board today other than say, no, we don't want to do that, we would work towards getting that established with high tide and then come back at the February meeting, and then we can approve that piece to get us through the end of this fiscal year. Okay?
Just with permitting, material allocation, and putting everything out for bid, that would push everything that we'd like to get done by spring of this year, not getting started until the fall.
JB, is that going to be an ask under new business?
That'd be, well,
Let me make you a recommendation. Why don't you,
Okay.
we'll pose that as an ask under new business so that we don't delay it.
Okay.
Okay?
That's fine.
Additionally, with the next step, I'd like to go ahead and begin to permit and develop the RFP for the 19 through 26 of West Mallard, which was closing the gap on the end of the 2017 work, and get that completed by June 1st. And additionally, complete the permitting and develop the RFP for 2016's replacement work so that we can get that out for bid at the same time. That would be in where we're getting another contractor. If we have a contractor that has a big enough company that they think they can field 2 crews, that's fine, but we would still review that prior to awarding it to the same contractor. And if we can complete that by, oh, I'm sorry, Ted.
That would be back before the board in the June time period.
Yes, yes. And then review the bids and award the contracts by July 31st so they can line all their materials up and their schedules to get us on board to start October 1st to complete that work by April 30th of 2019.
Use your mic.
I'm sorry. The large numbers at the bottom are strictly capital reserve, and that's just looking at, with no site visits yet or anything, that's just going straight off of the capital reserve.
All right. Anything else for Kevin this morning, right now? Good.
Kevin, just a clarification. So you mentioned capital reserve, and sometimes I think we get confused when we start talking about bulkhead reserves, capital reserve. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the bulkhead reserve fund is really used not just for repairs and maintenance, but we're also using it for what it sounds like really a capital replacement. When you start replacing really a section of 1,000 feet of bulkhead, right?
Yes, yeah, that's more of a replacement, yes.
So that kind of begs a question of, from a funding point of view and tracking. I thought I pushed it because I have the light on. Oh, it's just, this is going in and out. So I wonder if that's something that we should be looking at going forward, because I know we're going to be working on a reserve study, and we have a separate bulkhead reserve. And if you go and look at the national bulkhead reserve standards, how we track the money and really need to start thinking about, do we separate the repair and maintenance fund for the bulkheads versus the capital replacement of the bulkheads, especially as we start launching the new bulkhead replacement program that's going to become even more important because you're talking about a multi-year expenditures.
Yeah, I do think we need to look at it. I think right now, the bigger issue for me is that we're tracking ongoing repairs, et cetera, that's being done within the current budget by OPA people and is not being reimbursed out of the reserve replacement. So in other words, it would reduce the amount that is going to Public Works because that would be offset. So I do think we need to look at the whole program there to see where we stand funding-wise long-term, especially worst case.
Any other questions for Kevin? Kevin, thank you. JB, any additional reports before we move into the next item on the agenda? All right. JB.
I think that probably needs to go backwards. To the budget piece. And you've got some handouts with you. I will stand up and so I can project pretty good. Still got a little cold hanging on, but I'm a lot better than I was last week. For a summary page, we're still at a $30 increase in the annual assessment. That is alone is to address the increase in the estimated 1.4 plus operating deficit recorded for the last 2 fiscal years. The proposed budget had an increase of $60, 27 for operating and 33% deficit recovery. So we're left with the $30 now for deficit recovery. The total operating budget is $11.7 million. The reserve balances remain positive. The staffing levels have been reduced by 12.76 full-time employee equivalents. That achieved a reduction of $241,000. And the contribution to the bulkhead reserve was reduced by the $19 per lot for 1 year. And the new capital project funding was mostly deferred to future years. A brief review of some of the budget guidance that was adopted earlier in the year, or last fall. Amenity revenues should reflect no more than what was achieved in the most recent past. I went real conservative on revenue numbers, and I mentioned before last year's budget was broken, particularly when we looked at revenue. So that was difficult. Reviewed staffing levels and pay levels. Suggest 3% salary increase to be awarded based upon merit. The capital budget should be presented separately from the operating budget. Increase the capital threshold from $2,000 to $5,000. Road depreciation should be included. Originally in the proposed budget, I did not include it. It had not been included in the current year's budget. That added about $26 to the assessment. I did not put that in there. Upon working with the Budget and Finance Committee, we did add that back in there per these guidance documents. And then also a deficit reduction plan for last year's actual losses and this year's anticipated losses must be developed. That number could be spread over a series of years and offset by profitable years. And further, that number needs to be identified in the budget in preparation of the assessment. So that's where we started off with the proposed budget, having that amount included in there. Next slide is just, I'm going to keep talking this up till we get this into our nomenclature as an association. We have a draft budget, then we have a proposed budget. Then now, today, we have a recommended budget in front of the board. Now they'll take that and work on it for a few more weeks, and then we'll adopt a final budget. So those are the 4 different processes, stages of our budget process. The top bullets on this next slide, you can sort of forget, they're done and over with at this point. But what do we have left? What I mentioned earlier. We have today, you'll have an opportunity to comment when I finish going through this summary. And then you'll have the budget work sessions, February 5, 6, and 7, right here in this room. And you'll have an opportunity for public comment at each one of those. And then you'll have another hearing on February 10th, another opportunity to speak to the budget and what the board has been working on those earlier days. And then finally on February 24th, the board will final things up. Changes from the proposed budget. We reduced expense in payroll and benefits in the finance and membership department by $17,000. I know this next one is going to be talked about a little bit more about trolley sponsorship. We added revenue for that. It was about $3,100. This is for the advertising that goes on the outside. It's not for the very few or little or no ridership. It's for the people who are seeing it as it's going along. But I know the board's interested in talking more about that. Public Works, we reduced expense and payroll and benefits there. There were 2 positions that we currently have that are not filled, and we just eliminated them in the next year's budget. Fire and EMS, we increased the expense for capital reserve costs to cover the ambulance purchase for this coming year for another $47,000. We had 142 budgeted already. We added another 47 to it to get to the total 189 figure. Golf operations, we increased the projected revenue a little bit more by $25,000. That reduces the subsidy there a little bit. Yacht Club, we reduced the percentage of payroll and benefits in relation to revenue from 59% down to 44%. So the subsidy went from $338,000 negative number at the Yacht Club for next year down to $101,000 as a deficit at the Yacht Club. Administration, we had some slight changes in interest charges, and that rounds it out to continue to be in a balanced budget. Reserves, the bulkhead reserve, we eliminated the fee that's charged to all the owners. Everybody, waterfront lot or not, pays at least $19. Those who own waterfront area where you have bulkheads, they pay an additional $465. That $465 currently is still applied. The $19 that applies to everybody has been removed for 1 year. Roads depreciation, again, we added the roads depreciation back into the budget, $224,000, at about $26. Close to that. Regarding capital, the room addition to the sports core pool, we're postponing that to the tune of $225,000. And then the sanctuary crabbing pier over at the sanctuary, eliminating that, the repair and replacement of that was gonna cost about $135,000. That was deemed to we either needed to get rid of it or do it. So if we're not going to repair it, we need to dismantle it. So we're back to, from 60, now we're down to the $30, and it's really geared towards the deficit recovery of these last year and the current year. Again, there was budget guidance to that effect. We addressed it over those last 2 years, calls for an increase in the assessment of $30. Recommended to be a one-year approach. We'll review it annually. If we don't need it next year, great, because we've had profit, we've sold lots, other variety of things that we can do to get at that, addressing that deficit over time. So it wouldn't be not presented as a 5-year plan anymore. The next slide, and again, everybody has a copy of that particular page. Where would the $951 assessment go, or what am I going to get from what I pay? And that's what everybody likes to know every year. It's broken down into the various, your general operations are the non-amenity pieces. The amenity operations are all the amenity. Then our reserves and new capital. For example, administration includes general administration, which covers board activities, legal bills, auditor, elections, those types of things, the general manager's office, finance and membership, and public relations and marketing budget. $170 there, or 17.9%. Compliance actually reduces, it actually makes a profit, so that takes away $4. General maintenance is $99, public works $171, etc. If you look under amenity operations, racket sports cost you $2, no matter if you use them or not. Aquatics is making money. Golf is subsidized to the tune of $21 per lot. Beach club makes money. Beach parking makes money. Yacht club costs you $12 a year, whether you go to it or not. And marinas brings in money. And then you different replacement reserves. You can see a big number there with replacement. $198 of your $951 goes to the replacement capital reserve. And that goes back to what we were talking about that whole reserve study piece. That's how that number gets created. And that's where the board and budget and finance committee, when we have that discussion about what level of funding do we want to make it, 10%, 20%, 50%, that all goes into figuring out what that number is going to be in the future. And then the percentages over there on the right-hand side. Now, the next slide is a pie chart. Now, yes, you have a label over on the right-hand side, but if you're just looking at a pie chart, I notice I didn't put numbers on there, and I didn't do that for a reason. I want you to take that previous page we were looking at, and I want you to look at it. If I put the numbers on there, it's easy enough for you to look at it, but you might not learn it. If you're going back and forth between those two pages, you'll digest those numbers a little bit more, and you're looking at these different pieces of that pie, and then you'll realize what those numbers are. The largest piece isn't yacht club or golf. It's going to be reserves, maintenance, police, fire, those types of things. Not to say there's none of that, all of it's important, okay? But I wanted you to get the idea to digest that a little bit more rather than me just feed it to you. The replacement reserve items, these are projects that are identified in the reserve study and other things. Operating software wasn't identified in the reserve study, but it's something that would come out of the replacement reserve. Operating software, that's something that the technology work group is looking at, and I was talking about that earlier in my GM report. And this is where you have the mowers and the tractors and the police vehicles, those types of things. Those all comes out of the replacement reserve, okay? The next page is a continuation of that list. And then the last four slides really are summaries of the different reserves that we have. With the estimated starting balance, our contribution each year, your $951, remember that $198 of your $951 goes to replacement reserve. That comes up to that estimated contribution of 1.7 million for the replacement reserve every year. That's what we're all putting money into that replacement reserve to pay for things that eventually die off and we need to fix them or replace them rather. Estimated ending balance next year of 4.7 million. Bulkhead reserve. Estimated starting balance is 2.5. How did that get so high? Because we didn't do that work in 2016. We haven't done the work in 2017 yet. So that's where we're behind. That's what generated those additional monies in there. Now, if you go back to look at the slides that Kevin was sharing earlier, when we get out to 20 and 21 and 22, we're looking at spending over $1.5 million to $2 million. We went conservative on those numbers. The worst case scenario was a little over $2 million on those slides. You know, if we do better than that, we're still spending a lot more money than what we're putting into that every year for those 2 years to get everything caught back up. Otherwise, we just stay behind. Road reserve, estimated contribution there this coming year is $555,000. That's $325,000 from casino funds. And the other part is that road depreciation, which added the $26 back into the assessment number. And then I want to address new capital here at the end. There's 2 items in there. Drainage attachment for $8,500 and controlled access gate to the dog park for $6,000. I think everybody in this room probably knows this, all right? So I'm speaking to everybody that's not here and not involved and not following the process. New capital projects all come out of our operating budget. That impacts that assessment number every year. The more we want to do new capital-wise, the more it impacts the assessment. The less we want to do new capital-wise, the less it impacts the assessment. But also impacts our ability to do stuff, to add to our community and a lot of different interesting projects which are listed on the next page. Lighting the pond trail, doing exercise equipment around the pond trail, adding things to our playground equipment and activity types of events, lights for the pickleball courts. Those all added up. The things that were unfunded came up to $263,000. That would have added another $31 to the assessment. I didn't fund those. Not because they're bad ideas, but because I knew we couldn't handle that, okay? So, but that leads me to the point I was trying to get to is that regarding new capital, we need a new way of funding that. Otherwise, we're never going to do anything new because we just can't handle it that way. So we need to look at a different type of structure for funding of new capital projects over this next year and incorporate that into the 2020 budget. So with that being said, that's where we are in the process of things, and it is just that, a process. So thank you for participating, being here today, not just for the board meeting, but particularly for the budget piece. And then we'll do this again. We'll have 3 more work sessions with the board where we'll get into weeds and details and all sorts of good stuff. And then we'll have another hearing and another opportunity for you, the membership, to comment on what you think.
JB, thank you. And on behalf of the board, we will formally accept the recommended budget as the driver for all of our discussions at the upcoming budget work sessions on February 5th through the 7th. So that part of the meeting is closed. I will now open the meeting for public comments. If anybody that wants to make a public comment, there is a microphone on the front chair right there. Please, for the sake of those that are listening online, please hold the microphone close to your mouth so everybody can hear what you have to say. Public comments. Floor is now open. Sir.
My name's Bill Sheridan, 398 Ocean Parkway, and I just have 2 questions. I know when you replace the bulkheads, currently it is the responsibility of the owner of the lot to either extend, add to their dock, and have to replace or redo their boat lift. Is there any way we could, I know it's a item not of Ocean Pines, but of the lot owner, but is there any way we can work something in where we can have a contract, I guess, to subsidize, I use the word loosely, these issues, because they are expensive issues. They're not cheap. I had a neighbor that just had his boat lift put in. The next year, he had to have it taken out and redone because of the bulkhead change. The other thing is the reserve problem that we had last year, the $1.2 million. What are the driving factors in that, and how are we mitigating them in the new budget? Thank you.
Other public comments, and please, if you make a public comment so the folks can see the video, could you please come up and stand here so that you can be seen by the folks that are watching this online? Thank you. Any other public comments? Anna, you can sit. You're fine. You can see the video.
Well, everybody knows me anyway. I have two things I'd like to say. It's not a complaint this time. I wrote a book called Two Steps Forward, a memoir, and I want to thank the people for purchasing my book. It's very good, and also it's very successful. And I want to thank you. The other thing is, I want to thank you for allowing us to raise $4,000 for the wounded veterans by allowing us to use the community center. And I thank you from my heart, and that's it.
Doris Lloyd. I'm talking about bulkheads. And in the discussion, I heard no consideration for bulkheads that are too low and the water comes up to the house in storms or severe winds. I've been here a long time. I've paid $14,000 into that fund, and the water comes up to my house. And I really think something should be done about it. Thank you.
Other public comment? Oh, by the way, please state your name and your address. My apologies for not saying that. That's standard operating. Yeah, and stand on the mat. That's what we were instructed. That's the best way to do it. Sorry.
Okay.
Not picking on.
Is this good?
But yeah.
Can you hear
I was
me?
giving instructions, so thank you.
Okay. My name is Jeff Williams, 246 Teal Circle. I have some concerns about the plan for the renovation. It seems like investing more money into the food and beverage after the losses, not just this past year, but over the last, I don't know, forever. Since 2014, food and beverage lost $1.1 million. That's a lot of money, and you shouldn't be investing, at least with a good plan. And from what I heard, the plan is to have the golf director run food and beverage here. It doesn't seem like the best idea. But I think there's a lot of other options for upstairs. Obviously, a fitness center is high on my list. But there's a whole bunch of other things you could do. And you can change your mind in 2 or 3 years if food and beverage is back on track and you can use the upstairs. But for the time being, it seems like a bad plan. So, thanks.
Other public comments? Can
Am I
you
allowed-
please come up and state your name? Thank you. And your address.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Stein. I live at 2 Grandport Road. Am I allowed to ask a question, or you just...
Technically, it's public comments. We certainly can...
I don't really have a comment. My comment is really to Kevin about the bulkheads. And also, well, I just want... It has to do with dredging. If you dredge the canals and make them deeper, doesn't that make the bulkheads higher? You're not raising the bulkheads, but you're draining the canal to make it deeper. So, number one, we do need a lot of the canals dredged. A lot of boats are not able to get in and out at low tide right now. I can tell you that, and that's been going on for some time. And our canals should have been dredged many years ago, and it's been lax. Nothing's ever been done about any of the canals ever being dredged. So it's something that should be given top priority. And I just thought by dredging the canals, you're making the water deeper, which will maybe help prevent water going over top of the bulkheads. It's just a suggestion, and I'm bringing it up as an idea or a discussion matter. So,
Other public comments? Somebody.
Yes, I want to address the issue at the yacht club.
Name and address,
I'm sorry,
please.
Janet Stevens, 52 Hatteras Street.
Thank you.
A $30 hike in the assessment is a pretty big amount, especially when there was so much loss at the yacht club. And I feel, for one, that the situation at the yacht club was not controlled. The interim general manager was just let to do whatever he wanted to do, and to have two bands a night, Friday and Saturday, and it just was a situation that wasn't going to work, and nobody put a stop to it. You had people, because there was no place to sit, no place to put a drink, no place to put food. People came in, but they stood around, and nobody was eating, nobody was drinking. And I admit we had not been to the yacht club for a while because we weren't happy with it. Decided to give it a chance this summer, and finally just gave up. And I think there's so many people that got turned off by the situation, and I, for one, feel that we should not have to pay for the interim general manager's incompetence. Thank you.
Other public comments?
My name is Peggy Tomarelli, and I live at 31 Bird Nest Drive. And I would like to ask the board to seriously consider putting money into the budget for drainage issues. There's been studies done. The general manager is quoted in the Bayside Gazette as saying there's adequate staffing to deal with drainage. I think if that was true, we wouldn't have had the flooding situation we had just this past week. That all occurred because drainage ditches are not kept clear. Leaves and debris block up pipes that go under the roads. So there's not adequate staffing to deal with the drainage. If there was, the ditches would be kept clear. And I have to beg Public Works, and I have to admit Eddie Wells is very good. He's very responsive, but it's just that. It's reactive. We have to police it. And we're tired of cleaning out our neighbors' drainage ditches because they're vacation homes. They aren't down here in the fall when all the leaves are coming off the trees. And my understanding is that it's Ocean Pines Association's responsibility to maintain the drainage ditches. So I'd like to ask that the board consider putting more money in the budget for drainage. It's desperately needed, and I think all you have to do is drive around in a lot of sections of Ocean Pines during a rainstorm, and you'll see it. Properties are getting flooded, and it's compromising our property values.
Other public comments?
Vivian Crockney, I live at 23 Drawbridge. And I have a question in these tough budget times about employee benefits. It's my understanding that we pay 100% of the employees' health benefits, and I believe it extends to family as well. I just would like to put out there that in the world, in industry, that's no longer being done. I would bet that most of us have never worked in a position ever where 100% of our health benefits were covered. And I think we have great employees here for the most part. If we feel that a 3% per hourly rate or increase in salary is important in order to be competitive, great, then let's do it. In the long run, cost sharing of health benefits will save us money, and they can still have their annual increases. And these are tough times. I'd ask that you consider that as you take a look at the budget.
Other public comments? Seeing none, I'll close the public comments portion of the meeting. Go on to capital purchases. This agenda, there are no capital purchases, so we'll close that portion of the meeting and move forward to CPI violations. JB.
There are 7 listed on the agenda to address today. I'll point out 2, though. 79 quarterstaff, they are actually in compliance at this point, so we can scratch them from the list to be addressed. And regarding 41 Tail of the Fox Drive, I want to request that the board hold off on that one pending another inspection, shall we say, on that one. So that leaves us with the other 5. Concord Lane is shed and structures maintenance. They have gotten all their letters, and they are current on their assessment, but we're ready to send the action to the attorney.
I'll entertain a motion to.
Each
is it-
individually?
You done on, let's do it individually. You done with 28?
I'd move that we refer it to council.
That we
Refer
find
to-
them in continuing
Find them in
violation.
continuing violation and refer them to council.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions? Concern? All those in favor of finding them in continuing violation, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next.
Next one is 44 Brandywine Drive. This violation reference is from Section 800 regarding oversized vehicles, RVs, and trailer regulations. They have received all of their notices, and we need to get, as of the 16th of January, the camper was still there, and so we're ready to, they do have an assessment balance that's owed, and so we're ready to send this on to council.
I'll entertain a motion to find them in continuing violation.
I would move that they are in, to find them in continuing violation and refer to OPA council.
Second. Thank you. Discussion? All those in favor of finding them in continuing violation, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Next.
Next is 87 Martinique Circle. This is violation reference is Section 200.3, additions and alteration to existing houses. They are current on their assessments, but they have received all of their notices of violation, and we're ready to send this one on to council.
I'll entertain a motion to finding them in continuing violation.
I would move to find them in continuing violation and refer to OPA council.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor of finding them in continuing violation? Aye. Thank you.
The last is 144 Nottingham Lane. This is regarding trash and debris from violations of Section 8L and 14 of the declaration. They have received all of their notices of non-compliance. They do have an assessment balance that's significant. And then so we're ready to send that one on to the attorney.
And again, I will entertain a motion to find in continuing violation.
I would move to find them in continuing violation and refer to OPA council.
Is there a second? Discussion. All those in favor of finding them in continuing violation, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Seeing no other CPI violation requests, we'll move forward with unfinished business. And per the discussion we had at the beginning of the meeting regarding the change to the agenda, these are no longer be listed as motions. They will be listed as a reading, a second reading of each amendment. So starting with the first one, the second reading of Amendment Resolution B01. Ted.
B01 covers how we revise resolutions and the bylaws and other documents in OPA. It's a rather massive change to this document that was undertaken by the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. I'm not going to go through the thing line by line. It's online, it's in the packets, and in general, what it's done is this. It broadened the wording to include all of the governing documents of the association. It broadened the advisory committee's responsibilities, who is responsible for getting the documents to where. It also had a number of minor, non-substantive changes that were done in various different documents. It required that the secretary provide a summary of approved resolution actions, which had never been implemented before. And it also set it up so that in the future, as each resolution from a different advisory committee comes forward, those resolutions are then sent to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee to make sure that they don't violate other parts of our governing documents. And that way, by the time we get done, we're not going back and looking at them time after time. I can read it individually if you'd like, but I think it's pretty detailed as far as the changes that have been made.
Given the fact that there was a first reading that covered that detail, and the fact that this is a second reading, unless there's a specific request to do so, I would think we would not need to go through every one of those items line by line.
Okay. You want me to move to
All right,
BL4?
and then, let me say, let's the discussion, the description that Ted give, allow us to meet our formal requirement of a second reading of B01 and have that recorded in our meeting minutes. All right, the next item is resolution, a second reading of resolution B04. Ted.
B04 is the agenda development for board meetings, and there is one single changes. It changes the wording of old business to unfinished business. That's the only change in it, very minor, and that's it.
Okay. Let the record show that the description Ted gave allows us to complete the formal requirement for a second reading for resolution B04. The next item on our agenda is the second reading of amendment to resolution M06. Slobodan.
Thank you, Doug. Big booklet. So the amendment to the resolution M06, first reading took place on November 30th. Considering the change in the agenda earlier, this is now viewed as a second reading, basically, of the same amendment to the resolution M06 as recommended by the Budget and by the Elections Committee, and also the same has been reviewed in the past by the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, as well as a legal opinion has been rendered. At this point in time, the committee maintains the recommendations. Second reading is identical to the first reading version, and if there are no comments, we will proceed at the next meeting with a motion.
All right, let the record show that we've complied with the official second reading for resolution M06. Next item on the agenda is a second reading of resolution C07. Slobodan.
Thank you, Doug. Again, the same situation. The recommendations made by the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. First reading to amend resolution C07 took place on November 30th. Today, committee maintains the same recommendations. A second reading is identical to the version of the first reading. This is to note that the second reading is taking place, and it will be put forward at the next meeting as a motion.
All right, let the record show that we've complied with the second reading for resolution C07. Seeing no other items on the unfinished business agenda, I'll close that portion of the meeting, move to new business. Now, based on the amended agenda that we discussed earlier in the meeting, we'll now take the 4 second readings and move them into new business as motions. So I will entertain a motion to accept the second reading of amendment against resolution B01. Ted, I will accept the motion.
I would move for the adoption of revised resolution B-01. The motion is the board hereby adopts revised resolution B-01. The background, the revision of resolution B-01 was undertaken by the Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee. It was an extensive revision that accomplished 2 major goals. The first, which was to ensure that the resolution was coordinated with and in compliance with actual operating practice and with our governing documents, and the second, to better define the process of resolution changes. Discussion. The first reading of revised B-01 took place on November 29, 2017 regular board meeting. The second reading was today. There has been no feedback or suggested changes to the proposed resolution, and therefore no reason to delay the vote.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of accepting a motion of the second reading for adoption of the changes to Resolution B01 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Colette, the vote was unanimous.
Yes, thank you.
The next item, I'll entertain a motion to accept the second reading of Resolution B04. Ted?
The motion would be that the board hereby adopts revised Resolution B-04. Background, the revision of Resolution B-04 was undertaken by the Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee. It was a simple revision changing old business to unfinished business. Discussion. The first reading of the revised Resolution B-04 took place at the November 29, 2017 regular board meeting. The second reading was today. There has been no feedback or suggested changes to the proposed resolution, and therefore no reason to delay the vote.
Is there a second? Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of accepting the changes to Resolution B04 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Colette, the vote was unanimous.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, entertain a motion to accept the changes to Resolution M06. Slobodan.
Thank you, Doug. Correction on my earlier comment, I was saying, referring to a new meeting, I meant to say new business.
Thank you.
Thank you. Topic, second reading of Resolution M06. Motion to accept the second reading of amendments to Resolution M06, elections and referendum procedures, as recommended by the Elections Committee. The committee's intent is to, A, improve transparency in the elections process by providing the election results as soon as ballots are counted, and B, improve two other operational procedures. Background. During the OPA 2016 and 2017 elections, the committee members identified several areas where improvements to Resolution M06 are desirable. Elections Committee's recommendations are supported by two additional opinions. The Bylaws and Resolutions Committee stated that Resolution M06, as currently written, may not be in compliance with Maryland Homeowners Association Act 11B-111. The opinion received from OPA's legal counsel states that announcing the vote at the OPA's annual meeting is not required. Purpose and effect: to make changes to the Resolution M06 to address the opinions offered by the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee and OPA's legal counsel. The intent is to also respond to the ongoing membership's call for more transparency.
Is there a second? I'll second the motion for discussion. Discussion.
I'd like to, I'm going off, I contacted the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee chairs and the members of that and received feedback from Jeff Nepper, who is a key member of that committee. They'd like to take one more look at this. They had, in their comments, they had looked at this in March of 17. They were supposed to review it, the finalized version, in October of 17, which they didn't. And among their comments, they had that they had asked the M-06 chair, the elections chair, to have the attorney sign the document. And I'm not sure what that actually meant. And in contacting Jeff Nepper, his notes were the same. They'd just like to take a look at it here at their next meeting and make sure that it fits everything on the governing thing. So I would just ask to delay the motion for one meeting, if that makes sense, and let them do their part.
I have no issue with the suggestion. I would prefer that it be postponed till next regular board meeting. We have plenty of time to pass the motion. It doesn't affect really the elections schedule. So I think it's a reasonable to make sure that from a legal perspective, the language is bulletproof. So I'm okay with postponing the motion, let it be noted, till next regularly scheduled board meeting.
Thank you.
Other discussion? Cheryl?
I'll just indicate that there are two different parts of what's being amended from my perspective in this motion. With M06, one of which has been brought before the board previously, and we were opposed to it. It's being brought back again, and I continue to be opposed to it, and that is the portion of announcing the results at the completion of the counting, as opposed to doing it at the annual meeting.
Other discussion? Tom?
I just want to add to what Cheryl stated. As recently as 9 months ago, the Board of Directors did an exhaustive review of this particular resolution. We debated the merits at length. Although the attorney said it's not required to announce at the annual meeting, the attorney mentioned that he believed it was the intent of our bylaws that the results were to be announced at the annual meeting. During the discussion, Mr. Stevens amended to go back to announcing at the annual meeting, and the vote of the Board of Directors at that time was completely unanimous in favor of the amendment to announce at the annual meeting. So I don't see any new evidence or information that would sway my vote from what my original vote was.
Other discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to what Director Herrick said. Yeah, let's be clear about this issue. What the committee is asking is basically what the community asks, and that is full transparency. I understand Director Jacobs' point that this was voted, the motion was entertained, the changes to the resolution with regard to election results. But unless this is spelled out in the bylaws and becomes basically a governing policy and governing bylaw, I think the community and the committee and the board, because we change every year, has every right to bring up the topic back to the boards, in front of the board for a discussion. Perhaps next time the outcome might be different. We see it every year. So with all due respect, and I understand what's being stated, but I think what the position the committee is taking, and I just happen to agree with them, not just as a board member, but also as a homeowner, that what the committee is asking for is really no different from national elections, state or local elections. Results are announced immediately upon being known. This is not Oscar night with Price Waterhouse coming with a sealed envelope and briefcase and handcuff to the briefcase and all of a sudden, bang, here we go. It's election. The vote is being counted in the open meeting. Everything in the open meeting that takes place is a matter of public record. And I'm just asking my colleagues to take everything into account and forget the outcome, the last time outcome, and let's focus on really what the intent, as I stated, what the intent of this change is. And that is basically to respond to the community's request for more transparency.
Other discussion? Seeing none, from a procedural perspective, we have a motion on the floor that's been made and seconded, and a suggestion that the motion be postponed. I will tell on myself that parliamentary procedure, I'm not really sure if we should, if you vote to not accept the motion, you don't do that. So I would say, I guess the appropriate thing, and I'm looking to my colleagues to confirm, would be that Slobodan, you could offer to postpone your motion until the next meeting.
Certainly, kind of offering a motion to my own motion might not be appropriate, but I would suggest one of the directors offer a motion to postpone my motion, and I will certainly second it.
Yes. And now we'll put the parliamentarian on the spot. Colette, have you heard the conversation between us?
Yes, I have. From a parliamentary standpoint, I think you're correct, though, that if we vote the motion down at this point, then it dies, and we don't need to have a motion to postpone. However, I guess going back to discussion, I would say there may be argument to get legal, clear legal opinion on whether or not indeed it would be a violation of our bylaws to change this language.
Okay.
But I think we could vote on it, and if it's voted down, it's a done deal.
Right. right, so the intent would be to accept, I don't know, I don't think it's supposed to be in the form of a motion. I think it's supposed to be in the form of a suggestion to postpone the, this motion until the next meeting. Cheryl?
I think he,
Or
I was
with-
about to say,
yeah,
I think he
withdraw,
can,
okay.
yes, withdraw his motion at this
Okay.
point.
Thank you. That's why we have colleagues here to help out. Thank you.
Okay, for the record, I agreed to withdraw the motion with the intent of bringing it in front of the board at the next regular board meeting.
All right. All in agreement with Slobodan? All right, thank you, folks. All right, the next item, a second reading, motion to have accept the second reading of Resolution C07. Slobodan.
Thank you, Doug. Motion to accept the second reading of amendments to Resolution C07, Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, which will enable OPA to follow a traditional corporate model for the development of its multi-year strategic plan. Background. For several years, the committee tried to develop a comprehensive plan for the community without much progress. After much deliberation, the committee members came to a decision that continuing to use an old comprehensive planning model is no longer appropriate. Purpose and effect. To modify committee's current charter so that all its future activities serve as a resource/group focused on supporting strategic planning and planning review process. The intent is to turn the ownership of a strategic plan's development as well as its implementation to the association's general manager.
Is there a second? Discussion. I'm waiting because Ted looks like he's, yeah, the floor's open for discussion.
I know I'm in the minority on this, and that's fine. But my feeling is that there currently is no role for this committee. We have no strategic plan. I don't know when that would be developed. I do believe there is an absolute role for a task force or a committee or something when we're doing it. I just don't understand what this committee will do over, for instance, the next 12 months. We have no plan. We have no model for doing it, and I just don't understand the purpose of having a committee if it has no function currently. Now, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't have a function in the future, but to me, I just don't see the need to have it. We have had a comprehensive planning committee forever. We've never had a comprehensive plan, or by the time we finished it, it's been outdated. I do believe there is a role for a group of people to help with strategic planning. But I see that happening when it's done, and when it's over, I see it going to the general manager for implementation. That's just my end.
I think I agree with Ted. I would view it more as an ad hoc committee, work group committee. We clearly need it. There is no doubt about it. We need a strategic plan, 5-year plan that would drive action plans for the departments. I'm totally supportive of that, but I don't see, we haven't done this committee, we haven't used this committee for quite a while now, and I believe an ad hoc committee, as needed committee, would be much more appropriate in this arena.
Yeah, my question is, this committee's been in existence for quite some time, and not to be disparaging, do we have any collateral from them? Whether it's in the form of an email for opinions or some studies that they may have done in the past that has been preserved for the boards? I think that would help in kind of making sure, because I can see both points. You clearly need a strategic resource, somebody that's not involved with sort of the board activities or the day-to-day activities, that somebody can take an arm's length look at a long-term planning position and really start to look and build resources towards completing that plan. And at the same time, if we don't have anything that they're working on, if there's no activity, and we're in, for lack of a better term, kind of sort of catch-up mode. In other words, we're looking at the current operation. We know there's deficiencies there, and we need sort of short-term deficiency correction, if you will. And then therefore, so their I guess their feasibility of being a committee and providing something in the short term may not be as effective if we look at them as long term. So I can see both sides of the, can they help us in the short term? They can certainly help us in the long term. Do we have any gaps in the short term that we should address by, having this committee continue or dissolving it and using it in an ad hoc fashion? So, and I know, Cheryl, you were getting ready to say something. So.
Well, when you asked about what they have produced, I think this committee experienced a great deal of frustration over their attempts to produce a survey for the membership. All kinds of things got in the way of that, but I do see a purpose in this committee continuing, just like all of the other committees, and that is that they are there to serve both the board and the GM when they want to task them to help them with some particular bit of research or whatever the case might be. And so I would be in favor of accepting what they've proposed to continue their existence, because I do think there could be a need, and maybe we resurrect the survey again. Don't laugh, Joe.
I want to thank all of you for your comments, and I also want to recognize the committee for their objectivity. They've decided really not to continue to spin the wheels, but to make what is really a sensible and objective recommendation. And as Director Jacobs, Cheryl indicated, they did work on a survey. Extensive questionnaire was put together. The board, although not very quickly, did review and provide the feedback. So back to Ted's point and his comment, yes, there is really a need and a purpose for committee to continue on, survey being one of them. Ideally, we should really get that survey wrapped up before the invoices go out, and then send it to the membership when the bills are mailed in March. An example of why the survey is important and why the committee should continue on. I mean, just the fact that a member brought up the desire of the membership for a fitness center, and we received over 100 emails on that, resonates a will and a desire of what the community wants. And the only way we'll know that is we have a pulse on the community, and that's what the committee is actually trying to do, either via survey or through other media resources. In addition to that, we have a capital improvement plan that, again, it's another effort that hasn't really come to fruition. That needs to be incorporated into our strategic plan, or our strategic plan is going to influence the capital improvement plan. So there are, three-legged stools that are still work in progress. The reserve study, the strategic plan / comprehensive plan, and the capital improvement plan. So I'm glad to hear there is kind of a mixed mindset, but I would encourage you to just rethink your positions and really realize that for committee to continue to function in the newly proposed role is really something worth giving it a try, as opposed to pulling the plug.
Yeah. All right, I'll hold my...
Yeah, I agree with Slobodan. I mean, we started probably 3 or 4 years ago with the Beacon study, which went astray. We were looking for that three-legged stool where we would get some feedback from the membership to give us some direction on where we should go with the capital improvement plan, and possibly putting out in the mailing. And Slobodan says we have 2 mailings coming up in the next couple months, and we may be able to finalize that questionnaire and at least, not give us the exact what we need to do, but give us some thought process of what the association membership wants. And I think that's extremely important, especially I'd like to have an idea of what they want to help us decide how much money we need to put in reserves, because what we need in the future. In 2016, when I first sat in the first budget meeting, I was handed a CIP plan that showed that we were going to spend in $29 million, half we wanted to repair, refurbish, and maintain what our facilities are that we have now. Now, I'm not saying in the next couple elections it goes back to that and things will change, but it seems for at least in the near term, year and a half, the board is kind of looking to refurbish, repair, and maintain what we have first. And I think that's a big part of how much we will need to be putting into the reserves based on that short-term plan. So I agree that the committee's important. I think they did a great job last year. I'm extremely happy with what they gave us. Although it's not perfect, I still believe we need to put something out to the membership to help lead us where we need to go.
Doug, first off, I'm completely behind the committee changing what they were doing. Okay, that's 100%. Somebody's finally recognized there's no way we're putting together a comprehensive plan with 7 or 8 people sitting in a room. My problem is, and I want you to think about this from the practical standpoint, what you're saying sounds great, but we've had a committee in that can't get a study out, that can't get agreement on questions, that just can't get a work product done. And my question to you is, if you have this committee, tell me, are you going to guarantee me we're going to have agreement on a set of questions between now and the end of April? Or are we really going to get anything done? And that's where my issue comes from, not so much that this isn't a good idea, but who's going to drive this thing and get it done and stop second-guessing ourselves 400 times to have some work product come out of it? Because this just sits and it's like, you know, a treadmill. You're just going round and round. So that's my bigger concern here, less than making the changes in the language. I think that's a good idea.
Ted, point taken, and actually the rest of my colleagues' points well taken. Being a big advocate of the advisory committees, I'm behind keeping the committee there, okay? Ted, to your point, I think and I'm not going to use anybody else other than myself as a board member who perhaps dropped the ball, is not engaging them more actively, okay? We sat back and maybe it was we waited for them to do something and then they were waiting for us to do something, and then obviously that turned into a time lag, which in turn caused us to get where we are today and rediscuss it. I say we take the responsibility as a board, and if I need to lead it, I will. But I think we keep that committee. We engage them, because I had a meeting of the Executive Council, and it was well received of all of the committees. I pledged to them that we would look at using the committees better, in a much better manner than we've had in the past. I got a lot of positive feedback. Now I have to back that up. Here's a perfect opportunity to do so, all right? Yes, we don't have a product. We don't have collateral. We've got this survey. Now we have an opportunity perhaps to get that survey out, to use those creative juices, make a decision. Let's not let it go, well, I'm not sure about that question. I'm not sure. You know what? It's a question. Nobody's going to chastise you for asking something, okay? So get down to a point where we make a decision on the questions, get it out, and use that as the momentum for that committee to go forward. That's how I would approach it.
And I am fine with that approach if we're going to drive, okay? I just don't want to have a committee that does no work product and just talks about it for 3 years. So I'm good with the changes to the language, provided that we collectively or independently or however drive to get some solutions taken care of.
I think I'm on Ted's page with we need a strategic plan. I totally agree we need a strategic plan, how we get there, and I think all the comments are great. I just, how we get there seems to be challenging for us, and that should be part of the budget process. The strategic plan should drive the budget, which we haven't really had that to drive our budget process. I wonder, and this might be reaching, I'm just trying to marry the two ideas, I wonder if language in the resolution very specific to the process, such as something like the committee presents the GM with X for the budget. I mean, I don't know. I think that might formalize the process and really add to the process, not just for the verbiage, but give it the effect that, in fact, this committee would be intended to have, and that is to have the framework for the budget process.
I'm smiling a little bit at JB only because at the executive council meeting, I had sort of stated that JB, here is an inventory of intellectual capital that is willing to provide information to help you use them. So yeah, maybe if we just kind of promote that and say, JB, this is another part, another resource, another asset for you to look at budget prep, CIP creation, and those kinds of things. I think we've talked about it. I think we've socialized it. Now it's time to take action on it.
And I'm just saying, Doug, in that vein, I would go the next step, and I don't know where that puts us in the second reading process, but I would go the next step as other committees have in their charters. Budget and Finance, for one, has very definite actions that are to take place X, Y, Z, and I'm just saying if that were formalized in the resolution, then the committee would know that it's charged. It's too late for this year's budget, but it's charged by January of coming up with recommendations to the board for to the board and to the GM for the next year's budget process. That would be my recommendation.
Well, you hear-
Other than that, the rest of the language I could support.
I understand what you're saying. It's a point well taken. A strategic plan is a living document. It's not something you deliver like a study and you put it on a shelf and you might do something with it or not. So if you take that into account, and I hear, Ted's comment about, a product. We don't want to over-engineer the process. The Budget and Finance Committee is very different, and there's some things that are very specific related to audit time and other events. I would be more, I think, open to, for example, the board just giving a directive to the committee. We want you to complete the analysis of the survey by May 1 and deliver your synopsis. Now, it's an action-driven directive that, meets the need of that particular time and what's being worked on, as opposed to spelling out a procedure. We keep doing and over-engineer, almost like putting handcuffs around the intent. So I don't disagree with you, but I would like to suggest we stay away from, again, going back to the drawing board and working with and wordsmithing things. And if the board has a clear intent to see a specific thing accomplished, then let's get back to the committee with our individual inputs on the survey. Let's finalize the survey. Send it out and give the committee a deadline by when the board wants to see the results. And then we can do what we need to do with those results. That's
Doug, I don't think that I'm not in favor really of having this currently, but I am in agreement with the change of the language, and I am in agreement with the idea that we shouldn't detail it too much. I say maybe this solves my problem of not getting work product, for a lack of that, by saying, hey, we task you to get this done, bang, that's it. Throw it down, and then then we're there.
You use the standard language in the job description, other duties as assigned.
Yeah.
And you're done. Tom. And let's finish up, folks.
All right, quickly, just to answer you, Ted, the committee was tasked with coming up with a survey. They presented a survey to the board. The board then put their input into it. The committee took the recommendations from the board and did come up with a final survey that they presented at a meeting. The problem is the board is not getting to the point of acceptance. And I don't feel it's the committee's fault. The committee put a lot of time, effort. They listened to the board. They made changes based on board recommendations. It was the board that still could not say, this is the final product, let's get it out. So I don't want you to put the onus on the committee themselves. They did a great job. I just want you to understand that part.
I'll entertain one final comment. All right, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of accepting the motion to accept the second reading of Resolution C07, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Colette, the vote was unanimous.
Yeah.
He was the one I was looking at. Next item under new business. Motion to instruct the GM to issue an RFP for auditing. Slobodan.
Thank you, Doug. Motion to instruct general manager to issue an RFP for auditing services to audit associations' financials for current fiscal year that ends on April 30th, 2018. Background, last year some board members were not made aware of several important facts prior to the board voting to award a contract to the auditing firm that was recommended. Purpose and effect. This RFP will allow the entire board to award a new contract based on clearly defined evaluation criteria and important facts fully disclosed in advance. It will also provide our newly hired general manager and finance director with the ownership over the RFP preparation and the opportunity to participate in the evaluation and selection process.
Is there a second?
I'll second the discussion.
Discussion. Pat.
I support the concept of the motion. I support the RFP process and everything that you've detailed here to allow the general manager and the new director of finance to participate in the process. What I have difficulty with is the timing. I would recommend that we do the RFP in August or September for next fiscal year for several reasons. One of which is that I know we had a new auditor last year, but that auditor did probably the most in-depth review we have had, in my experience in looking back at our audits and management letters, that we've ever had, and came back with significant important recommendations. And I think the same auditor coming back with particularly in light of the fact that we have a new finance director, reviewing that list of recommendations in the management letter and in the additional procedures with our director of finance would be invaluable to our director of finance establishing the correct process and procedures in light of this in-depth review. And I know a new a new auditing firm would come in and they could look at that, but this firm did it, and they will have the personnel that actually took part in it, and there's something to be gained from that. Secondly, we do have a new director of finance, very capable person, lots of experience, but we haven't had a director in place now consistently for a year, so there is a little more challenge to the position for our size organization than would normally be there. Add to that a new auditor, and I think that just doubles the problems that could be in completing needed and necessary analysis and financial presentations with our new director of finance. And then lastly, this is almost February. By the time we craft an RFP, send it out, get responses, evaluate, we're looking at the end of March, I think, and that's probably, and then we're going to have to schedule the audit. Well, we've already been contacted already by our auditors for the dates for this year's audit, when their field work will begin, or pre-audit field work. So I think I totally support the RFP process and your motion, but I would heartily recommend that it be set for August or something in that time frame for next year's audit.
I looked at this a bunch of different ways. One, I agree with Pat. I think we're cutting it close on this year, and rather than withdraw or vote this down, I'd like to amend this to change the date to pass the motion that the board will issue an RFP in August. That does a couple of things. One, you're going to have a new board sitting, making decisions going forward when the RFP comes back in. And I think the other thing is, and this is my experience in business, anytime I changed auditors, the first year was a pain in the butt because they're coming in and it's brand new and we've got to give them enough time and there's got to be some precincts. So I'm in total agreement with you, but let's do it right. And I'd like, my offering would be to change the motion to August for the following year, if that would be acceptable down the line.
That's brilliant, Ted. I wish I'd have thought of saying just change the date.
So, Madam, would you be in favor of accepting a friendly amendment?
Before answering that question, I'd like to respond with my own comment and discussion. And, you know, trust me, I really have looked at this from perspective similar to what you have pointed out, as well as Ted. I think we all have experience and background in these areas, and we all know that we did have a new auditor actually that went through what you had just described, actually earlier last year. So we as a board have also decided, you know, let's remind each other that we were going to put off the RFP issue till the new director of finance is on board. That was decided by the board. That's why we didn't put anything out earlier, because we wanted that person's input. So that's why after the orientation meeting in September, after we decided not to just carte blanche reappoint the auditor, we said, let's wait till we have a GM and let's wait till we have director of finance on board. So in essence, what I'm doing is basically following through on what the board decided to do. Last year, when we made the change, was also a challenging year. We had interim GM, acting GM. We had a brand new director of finance that basically just came on board, and shortly thereafter, a new auditing firm showed up. So really, we already did this, and it proved out to be a good exercise. A new auditing firm did okay. I'm talking about the one that you're actually suggesting we continue the relationship with. So what I'm doing now is really doesn't have much difference from what we actually did last February when we went with a new auditing firm. And what we also need to keep in mind is that we have no contract with that firm. It was a one-time engagement. I have not seen a contract signed, unlike what we did with the legal counsel that had a clear expiration date. So I think what we need to do is also, you know, tighten up our current state of affairs with the auditor. Final point, and the reason I wanted to do this is, let's face it, the contract that was awarded to the auditor, current auditor, they are from North Baltimore. They were 50% more in costs, in expenses, than other two bids. If the majority of the board decides to maintain the relationship with the existing auditor, then I suggest we sharpen up the pencil and renegotiate the fees. So, you know, that's what I would like to hear, as opposed to, you know, what was maybe suggested earlier. I think it's our duty to sit down with them and say, hey, if you want to have us as an ongoing client for another year, let's renegotiate. So, in summary, what I'm suggesting we do now is pretty much what we did last year. We give a new GM, we give the Director of Finance an opportunity to take part in this. Actually, I have the RFP ready. I drafted one last year that was used by Brett. The same thing can be used. It can be ready within 48 hours, and then it can be up to JB to drive the bus with the RFP process, or the Director of Finance. So those are my thoughts, but I am open to, you know, how the majority feels on the issue.
Traditionally, with an audit firm, to address the contract idea, you do an engagement letter annually. The firm will give you a 3-year, you know, numbers or whatever, but you do the engagement, and that would be forthcoming as we decide who we're going to use. And I know that we successfully went through the audit last year with a new director of finance, one new director of finance, and then another new director of finance. Just because we got through it, well, one of the reasons was we had a very astute, you know, temporary director of finance, but then in addition to that, financial reporting that needed to happen couldn't happen because of the overwhelming work that was needed for a new auditor, something that we didn't see, but I've talked to the director of finance, and a simple thing like, for example, the FTE numbers that I feel are a critical metric for the board to have. There was no time to even think about developing that in August, when we were in the midst of this year that we needed real financial guidance. So while we made it through, we did slow down, but I don't think we made it through as best we could had the new director of finance had the time to analyze, to get in there, to, you know, what a director of finance does, jump on the table and say, you're not spending that anymore, that kind of thing. So I think there's a loss, there was a loss to having a new auditor, and I think there would be a loss this year. And then throw in the system thing, the whole system change. So I think I support it, but I love Ted's idea.
But I do think that we need to take a look at what the number is, okay, on this.
no,
I mean,
no,
I'm
and I agree
I'm
with that.
also in
I agree with
favor
that.
of
No.
negotiating hard
No,
to
sorry,
get
I
where we are.
missed that part. I agree with that too,
Let me touch on a couple of things. So on a point well taken, especially on the cost, all right? But, you know, remember, you also get what you pay for, too. You know, we get the bargain basement auditor, we might get a bargain basement audit. And I listened to our treasurer, I listened to our, folks on the Budget and Finance Committee, and the review that we did, the information that we got back from that auditor, all right, from this year, it was pretty thorough, all right? And it opened up a lot of areas that we perhaps, arguably, might not have considered had we not asked them to look at a little bit further under the covers with regard to process, with regard to deficiencies, with regard to risks, and so on and so forth. That coupled with a new director of finance, I try to stay away from chaos theory. So you've got this constant, right? You've got this group that already has an understanding of, they've been through the first audit. That intellectual capital right there, I think, is very important to help guide the new director of finance, with regard to helping him, get his feet wet, for lack of a better term. So that, to me, adds a level of stability. Are we paying a little bit more for that? Yes. Yes, we are. Okay, I would agree with that. But I think the cost is certainly going to yield a benefit in my mind, in the sense that we have some level of continuity, and we don't have two variables in the equation. We've got one. All right, and one, it would be, Steve, not picking on you, but a new director of finance. So if we can control one of the variables, I think that would lend itself to success. But I am sensitive to the comment that, yes, we were paying more for that, but personally I think it's worth it. I think it's reasonable to, and I'm in full support of the RFP, trust me, I am, and I just think, sort of practically and pragmatically, if we push it back to the time frame we're talking about, I think it'll yield the benefits that we think, given the consideration of, what several of us already talked about.
For the benefit of Ted and Colette, our two new board members, I just want to kind of state something that might not be obvious to them, that one of the firms that competed for the services last year is actually our old auditors. They've been our auditors for many years. They're all intimately familiar with the organization and our policies and procedures. So it wouldn't be a cold start. That, I don't want to leave you with that impression, especially our new directors. That I think that's also should be factored into our overall thinking.
I would just say two things. One, but the whole argument was we got to switch auditors, okay? So the idea that, hey, we're going to switch for 1 year, spend a lot of money, and switch back doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I do think, the other thing is, I do think that if we go back and we talk to them, JB, on price, normally what ends up happening is the first year in, an auditor charges you additional money because they've got to get in there, they've got to spend the money to figure out what's going on, and then you realize any savings or no increase, usually is more like it, as years go on here. So I am very sensitive to the price there on that too. I also believe, based on what I read, that we got a much more in detail than what we were getting before. So you get to the thing is, nothing wrong with the previous audit. It just wasn't, it didn't point out a lot of problems that we had that were structural and systematic that are going in there. So I'm fully in favor of this. What I'd really like to do is have the new board do it, but to pass a motion today that says, hey, as of, September 1, 2018, the RFP will go out for the 2000.
So it goes back to my question that I asked you some time ago. Would you be in favor of accepting a friendly amendment?
Please offer a friendly amendment. Let's vote on the amendment or amended language, and then we'll vote on a motion. Yeah, I'm okay with Ted offering a friendly amendment to the motion, and we'll vote on that, and then we'll vote on the motion as amended. Unless Cheryl has a comment to make, I'm not sure.
I'm in agreement that we shouldn't make a change right now. let's let the new director of finance use this firm, negotiate a better fee from them if possible, but let's not make another change at this point.
I got it.
I'm
So,
in agreement as well with changing the timing, not doing it now.
Thank you, Colette.
so the motion offered up would be to instruct the general manager to issue an RFP for auditing services no later than September 1st, 2018, to audit the association's financials for the current fiscal year that ends April 30th, 2019.
Are you making that in the form of a motion?
Sir.
I think we need to take the word current fiscal year out. This would
Okay,
be
for
the
th-
fiscal
for th-
year that ends April 30, 2019.
Agreed.
Hold on.
To amend the current motion.
Right, we got to vote. There's now a motion on the floor to amend. Is there a second on the motion to amend? At the risk of,
You need to read the amended motion.
right, and that's what I'm going to do, but okay, for practical purposes, please read the amended motion.
To instruct the general manager to issue an RFP for auditing services no later than September 1st, 2018, to audit the association's financials for the fiscal year that ends April 30th, 2019.
Understand? Okay. All those in favor of accepting the motion as, yeah, we seconded it. So all those in favor of accepting the amended motion, please say aye.
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 Yeah, the amended, right. Okay, the amended motion itself, okay. Now, the amendment to the motion goes back to the original motion, okay? So now the original motion is still on the table with an accepted friendly amendment, all right? Do we need to read the motion again for the record?
To-
Yeah, and I asked that because I'm watching him, so. But the
To-
answer is correct. So now we need, now this is again, the original motion amended by what we just authorized, as amended. Okay, so read it one more time.
To instruct the general manager to issue an RFP for auditing services no later than September 1st, 2018, to audit the association's financials for the fiscal year that ends April 30th, 2019.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. I hate to say this, but technically, discussion. Seeing none. I'll call the question. All those in favor of accepting the motion as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Colette, the vote was unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion. The next item on the agenda, motion to authorize the use of reserve funds for operations if needed. Pat?
Motion to authorize the general manager.
Pat.
Sorry. Motion to authorize the general manager to temporarily use reserve funds as needed to pay operating expenses until receipt of fiscal year 2019's assessment payments in March. And then I do the second. How do I do it?
You want to, you're actually
Read
making...
the second motion?
Yes.
I'd like to
Yeah, you-
offer a second motion?
No. You're making a
I knew it.
material change to the first
I'm
one.
making a material change to the first motion, so I'd like to do a.
Yeah, let me explain. So what happens, the motion that
sorry.
got posted
I knew I was
on the website for public consumption had some different verbiage in it. After further review, Pat went back and corrected some of that verbiage. So we have to technically recognize that the original motion was presented to the public and would have been discussed in this meeting. And what Pat is doing is requesting a change during the meeting of the original language, all right? So just so we're not confused here. So go ahead and read the amended, or no, I'm sorry, read the changed language.
The change in the motion. Motion to authorize the general manager to temporarily use reserve funds as needed to pay operating expenses until receipt of fiscal year 2019's assessment payments in March and April of 2018. The authorization is not a transfer of funds, but a temporary inter-fund borrowing of cash. Background. Ocean Pines does not have an operating reserve. There was a $300,000 plus loss in the fiscal year ended April 30, 2017, and there is a projected loss in excess of $500,000 for the fiscal year ended April 30, 2018. The association bylaws require that a 2/3 majority of the entire board approve the use or transfer of reserve funds for operating expenses. Discussion. Historically, Ocean Pines budgets results of operations and purchase of new capital to net zero for the year. The assessments collected are sufficient to cover reserve funding and operating expenses plus new capital if the budget is met. If the budget is not met, as in the current and prior year, there could be insufficient funds in operations to cover operating expenses in the latter part of the fiscal year, namely January and February. Assessment collections begin to flow in March, and operating expenses can be covered and the reserve funds reimbursed with this inflow of funds for operations, making the use of reserve funds a temporary circumstance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Slobodan.
If I may, I'd like to start the discussion with asking one important question because it might influence the dynamics of how we proceed with individual discussions and individual opinions. I think I saw Doug firing off emails early this morning, and we were all, I think, early getting ready to be prepared for the meeting. So I did some research this morning on this particular subject. One particular line item that caught my attention on one of the internet searches related to the borrowing from reserve funds is that a statement that says borrowing could create negative tax implications. I'm not a tax expert, and I think we have individual opinions on this particular subject, but this is a much bigger opinion or red flag that causes a serious question and a need for a serious answer. And I don't have the answer to that. I wasn't able to find one. But I'd like to know if, in fact, this does create a negative tax implication, and if so, what is that? Is this something we need to factor in as we really make these decisions, whether we approve or not approve? But I think we need to be fully aware of this.
Other discussion.
I'm not to respond to that, I'm not a tax attorney, nor was I ever a tax accountant by speciality, but our tax implication is for any unrelated business income, which would be the income from things like the yacht club or the beach club, which there isn't any. So I don't know that, the dollars, I mean, I guess if we had $5 million in unrelated business income, that might be an issue, but I don't believe there isn't any tax, I don't believe there is a tax implication, but I couldn't answer that as a professional because I'm not a tax attorney.
And
Good.
I'm not a tax expert either, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night. So, but I can say this, where I have seen this come up with, I'm on the board of another nonprofit, is where money is set aside, whether you call it reserves or endowments, and that money is transferred into operations, which is why we've got the voting structure we have. But normally what I've seen in this, and this was in a Virginia nonprofit, is that as long as the money is used as short-term funding, basically as a cash flow hedge rather than borrowing the money, and it's repaid, which is exactly what we're talking about doing, there is not a tax implication. But I do certainly think we should ask our accountants.
Well, I'd like to sort of from two perspectives. Number one, yes, it's being paid back. But number two, I'd like to think that since our governing documents, our bylaws allow for this to happen and clearly point out that there's a 2/3 supermajority that requires it, I think it's going to pass legal muster, with regard to whether or not we have any tax liabilities. I would be pretty firm in my belief that the lawyers and the attorneys and other folks that would have ratified the bylaws, certainly would have taken that into consideration. I seriously doubt we're violating any tax implications or putting the organization at risk.
There was a similar precedent for this here in Ocean Pines. This was before I was involved. There was a borrowing between reserve funds for the Gulf drainage.
Yeah.
And we, rather than go to the market and take a loan for 6% or 10% or whatever it would have been at the time, we opted to borrow from ourselves. So we borrowed from our historical reserve fund. So there is some precedent for transfer of funds.
Yeah, and
And this is temporary. This would be not cross a fiscal year, which is significant.
Yeah. And I can, I'm sorry, I can confirm that because in doing research, I actually reached out to several folks who have years of experience in this, and they said, we're not setting a precedent here. It's been done in the past. As long as we follow the, simple rule of it's a loan and we're repaying it, all right? And we have to make sure that we cover for that, and we're basically doing that right now. But we're not setting a brand new precedent that's never been done before in the association's history. Other discussion? Moving on.
Yeah, well, okay, now that we got that one out of the way, I think it would still be worthwhile to look at it, because I think from accounting perspective, it's different when you transfer fund from reserve fund to operating fund for the purpose of using it versus when you're borrowing. That money that comes in, it's a form of an income. You got to figure out how you record it, especially since it's going to go into the next fiscal year. So just from my perspective, this is where I think I get confused in terms of the, tax implications.
But there would, and that was my last point, Slobodan. There would be no recording of income or transfer of funds from fund to fund on our audited financial statements, because the borrowing would happen if needed, which it will be needed, in February. In March, we begin to have inflows. The chunk of those are for operations. So this would not cross a fiscal year. It would not be an interfund transfer on our audited statements.
And I would also think that we would want to make sure that we get, as part of the finance report here in the next couple of months, that we know where we stand on cash flow, so in case we get close. But I do think we ought to ask the question just in general for future needs.
Do you mean, it's going to happen in February, I think? But is that
No,
what you mean?
No, I'm talking about when we get to May, are we paid back? So that it closes out in a short period of time and we don't cross a fiscal year and trip something else.
Good point. It could be addressed in the internal financials in March. February, yeah.
Is it could or will?
It will be.
Thank you. Cheryl.
I'm just wondering if our new Director of Finance cares to weigh in on this? I'll recommend that we suspend Robert's Rules of Order to allow our new Director of Finance to respond.
All right, is there a second to suspending Robert's rules? Second. Okay. Robert's rules are suspended. Steve?
He needs to come up with the mic. I don't think it's required.
Yes, Pat and I have had conversation. I would agree with Pat's recommendation that it would be, from a tax perspective, and once again, I'm also not a tax attorney, of course, but unrelated business income really is the only tax implications that we have. So this would be an internal, funding transfer between funds. Looking at our budget, for next year, with the assessment, we're getting a cash flow of approximately, $6 million over the course of the year. The majority of that does come in the March, April timeframe. So we are looking to put together a cash flow projection for the next year, and we'll probably have that for the February or March budget and finance meeting. So, I feel that we'll be able to cover that.
Any other questions for Steve while we have him? Thank you, Steve.
The only other comment I would like to make for purpose of discussion, I don't think any of us obviously like the situation we are in. I just don't want to leave the membership with the idea that we're taking this lightly. And obviously, it's not the first time that the association experienced such situation. It's been done in the past. Money was borrowed. My only preference at this point in time is that we, if we can, and maybe Steve can answer that, I would be more comfortable if we can spell out exactly the amount that the board will authorize the association to borrow, as opposed to on such an open-ended, as-needed basis. I'm really uncomfortable purely from a fiduciary duty point of view. I would be a lot more in favor of to vote in favor of it if we don't leave it so vague and open-ended, but really spell out. We should know what a cash requirement is by now, and if we have to overshoot it a little bit, so let's do it. But let's put a number so that we can then audit it easier and have a simple transaction here.
Just in trying to figure out what that would be between now and the end of February, I would say we would cap it at 1.2 maximum, not to exceed 1.2 without coming back to the board. And then between now and the February board meeting, get a good cash flow through the end of the year as to what we actually needed to do. Well, that's the maximum. I don't know what we actually need, up to 1.2.
The projected loss for the year right now is over 1.5. So it's probably not going to be 1.2, but it you know, we should, I believe we should authorize that so we don't have to go through this, you know, again in February, you know, until the inflows start in March.
Do we have any idea? I mean, 1.2, obviously, you know, you thought through some criteria to get to that number. I mean, is that a solid number? I mean, we have contractual obligations. We have got payroll. Do we have any other major capital purchases planned for the next 60 days? And if so, can they be deferred? You know, those kinds of things.
I think we can defer.
You know, do we have? I mean, I kind of agree with Slobodan. I'm a little uneasy with this, you know, open checkbook approach. Arguably, we wouldn't do that, but the idea is, I think we need to have some ability to have a threshold somewhere, or at least an idea of projected expenses, you know, for the next 60 days.
What I would suggest is that, I mean, it's going to be impossible to do that today, sitting in this meeting, and we're going to need the money here in February, okay? So you got a couple choices. You got a special board meeting, or you can say, if you want to say $500,000, not to exceed $500,000, and, you know, see where we, and then come back to the board at that point and allow the general manager and the finance person to put together what actual needs are going to be between now and March. In other words, you know, if we want to set a cap on that, amend this motion to set a cap on it to get us through the next, what I was just trying to do was say a not to exceed,
right,
to get something out there, okay? So to address your thing that we're not going to pull $4 million out of there. So I'm just looking for something that gets us through to time for staff to be able to say what we actually need.
I would also pose another question in addition to this. You know, let's remind ourselves we got 3 months left in a fiscal year. Have we, and I guess it's really a question that only JV and Steve can answer, but have we taken a look at a conscious look to see if we can eliminate some of the expenditure for the next 3 months and kind of bring down that, you know, those costs so it doesn't, you know, I'm not suggesting we shut the government down like, you know, what happened with Washington for 3 days, but if we can, you know, do some due diligence and say, let's say this is really not, this is essential, but this is not, and let's see if we can, you know, cut down on some unnecessary items that everybody can benefit from, especially the association and the membership.
Yeah, and that has a lot of merit. We've actually had that discussion already. But from my perspective, I see two things. Number one, we could pass a motion today with a not-to-exceed number, or we could task the general manager and the director of finance to give us a much more accurate number, and I would not be opposed to holding a special meeting because then we can finalize it. Right now, even if we said a not to exceed, the possibility exists that based on the analysis that's done, we might have to meet again anyway to adjust that number. Personally, I'd rather say, and again, I think it's prudent to just, when we have the final numbers, call a special meeting with that topic in mind, and we'll put it to bed, and it's nice, neat, clean, delivered, and there's no questions.
And could we aim for that February? I think we meet for the budget
We-
February 8th.
we-
That would be
I would-
perfect
if-
timing
if-
for Steve to
If,
have.
if we take that approach, I would challenge my
Yeah.
board colleagues to say, then we've got our homework to do. I'd challenge JB, hey, we made a public commitment to do this. There's no dilly-dallying. Let's get this information right now, and we'll call a meeting as soon as we have the information. Is that agreeable to everyone? Colette?
Yeah, so we are going to, delay this motion to February
Well,
7th and do an
with,
amendment
yeah, withdraw.
at that time?
Yeah, actually, technically, we'll withdraw the motion. All right, all right, all right. All right, so Sullivan, do you withdraw the motion? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. How long have we been going now? I already missed my tea time, so.
I
doesn't matter.
withdraw the motion.
You withdraw the motion? Okay. Thank you, Pat. So, directed, based on our conversation, colleagues, we have some homework to do. JB, please, and Steve, would you please get us that information as quickly as reasonably possible? And then, as soon as we have that information, we will be convening a special meeting. Even if we have to attend it by, remote, we'll certainly do that with that topic in mind. Cheryl, I'll entertain one more, and then we need to move on.
I would just suggest that we're going to be meeting on the 5th, 6th, and 7th of February. We can have a special meeting before we start one of those work sessions, since we're already planning to come together.
Right, the date is optional. I just don't like, and I don't want Eastern Shore time to creep in here. We need to get something right away, and let's get it done, all right? Okay. Thank you, everyone. All right, next item on the agenda. The motion to address the reserve study, Ted. And by the way, this was the new motion that was added when we amended the agenda.
The motion is the board shall proceed with completing the reserve study as follows. 1, dissolve the reserve study group effective immediately, publicly recognizing the structure they brought to the process and thanking them for their efforts in ensuring OPA can now complete the process. 2, direct the general manager to complete the review of reserve components, those are the items, no later than April 1st, 2018, and provide the revised list to the reserve study contractor, Design Management Associates Incorporated, to update the reserve study. 3, upon completion of the grading the study, DMA will make a presentation to the board and the Budget and Finance Committee on the updated report to include presenting various funding options available to OPA based on industry best practices and guidelines. 4, the board, with the Budget and Finance Committee's input and recommendation per Section 8.03 of the bylaws, will determine the number and type of reserve funds and set funding parameters/formulas for each fund. Background. On July 30th, 2015, DMA was recommended as the reserve study contractor. For the past 30 months, work by the Reserve Study Group and others has focused primarily on reviewing assets, their categories, and life expectancy. Recently, the general manager and staff have actively assumed that responsibility and are nearing completion of the action. The board also increased the dollar threshold to $5,000. In order to use the study for its intended purpose as a reliable financial and asset planning tool, we need to complete the process and tackle the tough questions of number and type of funds and the funding levels prudent management and historical OPA data dictate. Discussion. Regardless of your belief regarding reserve balances, the time is now to tackle the hard part and finally address the type, number, and funding of reserves.
Doug, just before you second the motion, because I think what I have to say might simplify things so we don't go through the amendment, the friendly amendment and all that. I just noticed something that I think might need to be added for sake of correctness. Your point number 4. At the very end of the sentence where you end with for each fund, I was going to suggest that you add and update resolution F03 accordingly, because that resolution already has some of the reserve funds spelled out. So I think before you second it, let's just add that, and I think I think that's just an oversight, a missing piece that really needs to be done.
Right, and this is that dilemma between
Yeah.
practicality
Yeah.
and parliamentary
Yeah.
procedure.
So, and update resolution F03 accordingly.
And update resolution F03 accordingly.
Okay, thank you. And is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Discussion. Tom?
I have a question. Number 4, what's the time frame to set the funding parameters for each fund? Is the CIP going to be developed before that happens?
Here's the way I look at it. Reserve funds are for replacement of current assets, okay? They're not for new capital. So if there's anything in new capital, that's completely separate from there. And by using the reserve fund, as was talked about with bulkheads, we can go through and figure out what needs to be done. I think the CIP needs to be done kind of as we go forward here as part of a strategic look at the association. I didn't put dates in other than April 1st because I believed that based on what we had heard from JB that was a doable date for the scrub. I don't know how long it'll take DMA to upgrade it, the study. As soon as they finish upgrading it, if it's 30 days, we schedule a meeting, we talk about it, and then we start getting into the nitty-gritty of what do we need and where are we going to go. And I think we also have to look at things such as OPA data. What have we actually spent over years of time as to what we need? And there's at least 4 that I know of ways of looking at this, from having a threshold, all of that kind of stuff. But what I didn't want to put dates in there, Tom, because I'm not sure promising DMA's time frame was a good idea. But my idea would be, I'm thinking in the next, if in February they can be ready, then we would meet in February. I think certainly by the end of April, I would be looking at us having the first major discussions on where we're going long term. Because this needs to get resolved so that it can be used going forward as a planning tool for future budgets. So,
Well, my question more so, and I understand you're talking about new capital, but this building was targeted for $3.2 million in 2 years, this year and next year. It's probably, the way the board proceeded, it'll probably be $1 million or less. Same thing with the admin building. We're talking about refurbishing that admin building, using meeting room upstairs, refurbishing that building. What if a board in a year, or this board says, well, you know what, we decided we're going to replace that admin building. It is a replacement reserve. It's the same reserve, but it's how you use it. Are you going to repair, refurbish? So we need some indication of what the plan is going to be to determine how much needs to go into those reserves.
and I think you're correct, but the real issue is that every time we develop a CIP or whatever we're calling it, capital improvement plan, the next board changes it and the next board does it. My goal is to say, okay, we've got a document that's scrubbed 95%. We're not going to argue about whether a golf cart lasts 11 years or 12 years. We're close. We know what, if we don't do anything other than what's in this book, it's going to cost us. Then each year you go in here and you update. If a board says, hey, we're not going to do a $3.2 million fix, we're going to do $1 million, that changes, which changes the formula, which changes the amount of money that has to go into reserves or comes out. So yeah, they both go together. My goal is to try to get us to where do we want to be kind of on a policy statement. What do you want? Do you want a new capital reserve? Do you want, and how do you fund those and where should they be? Those are, I'm kind of looking more at policy, and I agree that comes into it, but they all get plugged in. So if a new board comes in and says, hey, we want to spend $1 million to, redo a playground, that has to get plugged into the reserve as, hey, we're spending this $1 million, whether it's new capital or not. It may just change, it changes the numbers. But right now, we have a study that we received in January of 2016, and they tell you in reserves, redo these things every 3 to 5 years. We're into 2 full years, and we have never gotten to the core idea of what should reserves be, regardless of what we're going to do, and what should the formula be. And I'm just trying to move us to that thing. You're absolutely correct. All of the numbers will change based on what the new capital is, but getting to having the 30,000-foot discussions not only here, but as JB has said in his presentations, educating everybody what happens here and looking out 10 or 15 years is critical, because it does influence those CIP decisions, you know? And that, so I'm just trying to move the process along to where we do have those discussions.
Other discussion? Ted, well, I guess, Ted, you've been an advocate of this. You know, do you see the CIP sort of being in lockstep? And do you see the, I have an opinion on it, but the reserve changes being part of the budget process every year? In other words, right now we kind of keep the reserve sort of study in and of itself kind of separate from the budget. I think it sounds like we probably ought to start making it inclusive of the budget preparation process. And Pat, I'm sort of asking the same thing, is that, you know, maybe we have to modify our, again, budget approach to things, because we're making a commitment to really, and I agree with you, Ted, we've had that document since the beginning of 2016, and, you know, we talked about baseline funding, that's your favorite one, right? And then, and all the different thresholds, and we haven't done anything. So, first of all, I commend, the effort to let's get this going. We've had this information, so let's stop sitting on our hands, let's go. But I think there's some ancillary things that would probably have to happen, so I don't want to forget those. We don't have to discuss them right now, but I just want to sort of bring it to the top of mind as we have this discussion. If we move forward with this, we are raising our hand to say we're going to accept a few more responsibilities as we move forward in any subsequent budget processing. So,
And as an addition, I've already, I don't remember who else was in the room, but JB has already addressed this issue and this process and supports this process, and getting it to the board sooner rather than later with DMA, with a review of where we are making decisions. And I see it as totally a living document. It's going to have to be looked at every year, and every board might change in whether they want, what kind of funding they want, what they want to fund, but at least it will be part of it, and decisions will be based on factual information, based on certain assumptions.
any other discussion? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. With, no. The change was done before the motion was seconded. All right, see, the team came together and we circumvented a step and got the whole discussion shorter. Colette, the vote was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, the next item that was added to the agenda was discussion of the cash reserve. Slobodan.
Thanks, Doug. This is going to be short. I'm hoping it will basically lead to some action items that we. No, I just literally just added it this morning. There's nothing written. It's just.
Is this in form of a motion?
No,
no,
motion.
This is discussion.
Just a discussion.
Discussion item. Okay.
Just a
thank you.
topic, just for a short
Point of
discussion.
order.
Yep.
Discussion item, not a motion on the floor.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, just to kind of recognize first one fact, we have a member in the community, Marty Clark, who's been challenging us for a long time to have our cash work harder for the association. And I looked at our December report, and I'm looking, we have basically $7 million in ICS and money markets, and then we have $1 million in CDARS. Our $7 million is now earning 0.6% interest. Now, here's the thing, I don't know individual experiences and knowledge in the investments, but I want to remind the board first that according to our investment guidelines, FO1, one of the things that's allowed is basically investments in a short and intermediate government obligations. Treasury bills, I'm going to use as an example because that's what I buy. I don't know what you all do with your cash. I don't have $7 million. I have a much smaller amount in my reserve. But just for the purpose of discussion, right now, and I know we need to pay attention to the overnight liquidity, to ultra short-term liquidity and a short-term liquidity, which means it dictates how we park our cash in the treasury bills. But right now, I earn basically twice as much on my 4-week treasury bill, 1.24%. On my 3-month bill, I earn 1.45%. The 6-month treasury bill is paying 1.65%. That's 1% more than what we are getting now from the money markets. So what I'd like to suggest is that we really challenge the board and the treasurer and the GM and the director of finance to come up with a better use of our cash. Especially now, we really need to do it, because if you just take an example that, you're looking at a 1% difference, and let's face it, we are in a year where the interest rates are changing. The market is going to, the Fed Reserve is probably going to meet in April. There's going to be a vote to bump the rate probably by 0.25%, 2 or 3 times, just based on the economic conditions and what the talking heads in Washington are telling us. So I would like to suggest that we put together 2 or 3 people. Let's come up with a strategy, and then let's get to the board and submit a proposal to basically recommend a certain treasury bills transactions to take place, purchases to be made. And let me just leave you with one final thought. This is what corporations do on a daily basis. Billions of dollars are parked in a treasury bills and notes. Warren Buffett, according to the annual report, has about $100 billion sitting in a treasury bills till he figures out where he wants to make next investment. And so do other corporations. So I think we really, 1% on a $7 million is $70,000. That's a lot of money.
If I could I respond to that?
Yeah, it's a discussion.
I think that one of the issues with our cash has been related to the change in the director of finance position over the years. Over the year, it takes a little bit of time to get things in place. We have begun the process in November with going to CDARS, laddered, and it sounds like the rates, they don't show on here, and one of the things that we're going to do next month is our cash and investments report that comes out monthly. We'll have a lot more detail on it. It will highlight that it's all insured, et cetera. But it will also have the breakdown. We're currently doing 3, 6, 9, 12-month CDARS, and we're getting, for our 12-month, we're getting 1.75, 6-month, 1.6, 3-month, 1.3. So they sound very close to your T-bills. That doesn't show on this. So we need to show that. We did $1 million more than is on our current report, January 3rd. And Steve is in the process of doing $1 million more. We're working with the Budget and Finance Committee on their bank recommendations. I think we're in your rate ballpark, and I think a better reporting mechanism on a monthly basis will give everybody comfort that, yes, we are following our investment policy and maxing. And I know, and one of the reasons we're laddering is for its availability, and then because the rate is moving. We know the rate's moving, so we don't want to chunk it all in today. So that's a really technical term, chunk. But so I think a more detailed report monthly will alleviate a lot of concern about the cash, but it's a very good point, and it is being addressed.
Yeah, I would love to see that kind of a breakdown. One of the reasons I'm doing treasury bills as opposed to CDs is basically the tax benefits, because the federal investment, federal instruments are not taxed at the state level.
Right.
Interest from those, which makes a big deal, if you're looking at.
We don't have any tax.
We're nonprofit, but I would love to see us, whether it's at a committee level or a small group that's going to look and provide us with some investment advice. But, when you look at a treasury bill right now, 52-week pays 1.83%. So that itemized report will really give me a little bit of a level of comfort. We are getting a good return on our cash.
And the Budget and Finance Committee is looking at this as well.
So, Cheryl.
I was just going to say, rather than trying to pull together some other group, this is perfectly something to be tasked to the Budget and Finance Committee.
And they pay attention to it, believe me,
I was going to say, go back to my comment earlier, we've got these advisory committees, let's use them.
And I would say, Slobodan, contact John Viola and weigh in with this stuff, since he's the chair of that committee. And
I'll actually plan to attend when that's on the agenda and share my information and knowledge with the with
Yeah,
with
and I
the
think this
committee.
is a good discussion, although it's very topical, it's good to know that the membership understands we think about these kinds of things. We do have, not only a vehicle to do so, and then, again, not putting our new director of finance on the spot, but here's another opportunity to weigh in, bring some experience to the table, look at, different ways of doing things, and then integrate with not only, the staff and the board, but the advisory committee as well. So I think there's a lot of benefit in kind of having that discussion. Okay. There was one other item based on our JB's report from earlier. There was a suggestion to allow them to continue to use High Tide on the existing contract to complete the work that they have planned in the short term. We certainly don't need a motion for that, as the contract is already in place. I would just like to get consensus from the board that we should instruct JB to continue to move in that fashion so that he can continue to do the short-term work. Any concern or discussion on that? All right, JB, it's you have the approval of the board to move forward with the existing contract with High Tide to complete the short-term work, and then as the full bulkhead plan is developed, we'll move forward in that fashion. All right. All right. Is there any other new business? That's not new business. Counselor, you should know. I already missed my tea time. It doesn't. I'm sorry. We're getting punchy here, folks. Sorry. So, all right. Seeing no business, I'm going to close that portion of the meeting. Move into committee appointments. All right. There's there's a motion to the Jerome Trust Danick for a term extension for recreation and parks. Trust that you've read all that information. It was presented in your packet. It actually has to be in the form of a motion to extend him, so I'll entertain a motion to extend it.
The motion is to appoint Jerome Trust Danick III for a fourth term on the Recreation and Parks Advisory Committee. Background: Mr. Dank's third term ended November 15, 2017. He has brought special expertise and knowledge about bicycling and the bicycle community in Ocean Pines, Worcester County, and Maryland. To the committee, there is no other member with this knowledge and expertise.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
My only question is, Colette, is there a waiting list to get into that committee? Has somebody been waiting for a period of time?
Excuse me? I can't understand the question.
I'm just wondering if someone's been waiting for a period of time that's been on the list to be assigned to that committee.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thanks.
This was a recommendation that came from the chair of that committee based on the need.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of extending the term for Mr. Derrick, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Colette, the vote was unanimous. All right, and then there's one more committee appointment, John Dilworth, first term on the ARC. Any questions about Mr. Dilworth? All those in favor of the appointment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, next item is adjournment to closed session for contractual issues as permitted by the Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Section 11B111, subsection 4. Meeting of the Board of Directors or other governing bodies of the Homeowners Association or a committee of the Homeowners Association may be held in closed session only for the following purposes, and it's to deal with contractual issues. I will entertain a motion for adjournment to move into closed session.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay. Food and beverage.